Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
Population control. Population control. Bless my soul. Population control. Population control.
The United Nations says there will be 2.5 billion more people on the planet by 2050. Each will likely create more carbon emissions, and scientists say those emissions could reach a dangerous tipping point by mid-century. To avoid a disaster, one man is proposing a radical idea. As NPR's Jennifer Ludden reports, he aims to convince people to have fewer children.
Travis Reeder is not a climate scientist. He's a philosopher with the Berman Institute of Bioethics at Johns Hopkins, and his arguments are moral. When we meet, he's in a tweedy jacket and sneakers, speaking to several dozen students at James Madison University.
How old are you going to be in 2036? Are you thinking about having kids? How old are your kids going to be in 2036?
Dangerous climate change will be happening by then, he says, and the world's poorest nations will suffer most, even though rich countries like the U.S. create far more carbon emissions per capita.
So here's what's happening when I have a kid. I'm creating a being who's doing the much greater proportion of the contribution to the harm, and she's not going to suffer for it. The other kid is. And that seems unfair.
What about that big climate deal in Paris? Reeder tells students it doesn't cut emissions nearly enough to avoid a catastrophic tipping point. But this might. He cites a study that finds reducing global fertility by just half a child per woman could have a huge impact if it happens soon.
Thank you all for your attention.
It was kind of terrifying.
Student Garrett Wilson says before this, he never would have connected climate and kids. Valerie Smith has thought about that. She's even argued with her mom over it.
We always have people asking, well, why wouldn't you have kids? And I think it's a great point that he makes, saying, well, no, you don't have to explain yourself. The people who are choosing to have children, maybe they're the ones that need to explain their reasons.
The people choosing to have children?
And it's the big when up the spout again.
Hey! That's right. It includes Reeder. At home in Maryland, his 2-year-old daughter, Sinem, stands at the knee of his wife, Sadia.
I have been one of those women who actually craved to have a baby, to go through pregnancy and everything. That mattered to me a lot.
In fact, Sadia wanted a big family. So Reeder caved, sort of. He decided you can't deny someone the hardwired human fulfillment of creating a child. But he also convinced Sadia that the moral bar for a second one is higher. They are one and done.
When I write online, I get some nasty comments, and a lot of the things that people say is, well, he obviously doesn't have any children, the way he talks about it. So look, I think it's important that I exactly know the value. She's the most amazing thing we've ever done with our lives.
So how do you convince millions of people around the world to forego that? Reeder has a plan, along with colleagues at Georgetown University, Colin Hickey and Jake Earl. For poor nations, they propose paying women to refill their birth control, and something with proven success. Soap operas, like this Indian one, with plot lines on family planning. For richer nations, Reader says the U.S. and others should do away with tax credits for new parents and actually impose penalties, like a carbon tax on kids. And he knows that sounds crazy.
But children, in a cold way of looking at it, are an externality. We as parents, we as family members, we get the good, and the world, the community, pays the cost.
What that will actually translate into is it becoming much easier for wealthy people to have children than for other people to have children.
Rebecca Kukla is a bioethicist at Georgetown University. She also worries that poor and minority women who have more children would be stigmatized. Of course, Travis Reader does not expect the U.S. or other countries to embrace his ideas. He'd be happy to simply change people's assumptions about having kids. But still, compared to so many ideas for addressing climate change, he says this would be easy.
It's not a feat of geoengineering or econoengineering. We know exactly how to make fewer babies.
And he says it's something people can start doing today. Jennifer Ludden, NPR News.
If you're supposed to be in a position to help, you should do that. You should help, not hinder.
Tonight, that mom's accusing a Petersburg firefighter of racism. He refused to give her a bag of ice.
8 News reporter Nikel Williams spoke with her and has more on what happened in this 8 News exclusive.
I thought it was a black-white thing. You know, I hate to say it and I hate to call a spade, but as the children say, it is what it is, you know, and it's the truth. I felt like it was a racial thing.
Stacey Claiborne is a full-time nurse and a mom of Deshaun Trippy. She was driving on Johnson Road last week when he had his most recent.
I was like 2 seconds from the firehouse. Go to the firehouse. I tell my oldest son, I say, hey, take this glove, go up to the firehouse, ask the fireman to give you some ice in his gloves so I can get on your brother's nose so I can get his nosebleed under control.
Claiborne says a firefighter turns him away.
So my son comes back and says, the fireman told me I can't get in the ice. It's for their personal use.
Taking matters into her own hands, she goes inside the fire station. And for a moment, she thought she'd get some help.
I met with different fireman, and he said, can I get some ice? My son's having a bad nosebleed. I just need the ice to get his nosebleed under control. So he said, sure, ma'am, I'll get it for you.
But then
the fireman came around the corner. They told my son that he couldn't have no ice. He told that gentleman, I said, don't give her no ice. Go out to the car and find out what's going on.
Meanwhile, the 11-year-old's nose is still bleeding.
He comes out, paper and clipboard in hand, started asking me questions. What's my son's name? How old is he? And I'm telling him that's not relevant information right now. I just need ice for my son's nose.
Claiborne says after the firefighter told her she didn't know what her son needed, she left without any help.
Oh, now you were one lucky nigger.
Why haven't you learned anything?
Well, 2 Choctaw County high school students have been suspended for the rest of the semester after admitting to beating a fellow student. Happened after their sister claimed that she was called the N-word. News 12's Michael Deere explains how the father ended up under arrest after talking to the principal.
The Choctaw County Sheriff's Office remained outside of Fort Towson High School Monday amid tensions from an incident involving 4 students last week. The Jones family believes the administration has failed to deal with ongoing issues between their 3 black children and a white student. Last Thursday, Rashonda Jones says the white student directed a racial slur at her while in the gym.
He walked up to me and said, "You N-word." And so I had no idea why he called me that at all.
She told her brothers what happened, and they found the teen boy that day and took matters into their own hands. They admit they punched and stomped him in a stairwell at the school. They don't know how badly they beat him, but say that they've been told he went to the hospital.
My son is going to be 17 next week. I have dealt with this all of their lives. I have to deal with her coming home crying. She loves to go to school. She wants to go to school now, but I don't want to send her over there if I can't be there.
The Jones boys, a sophomore and junior at the school, were suspended for the rest of this semester. The other kid has also been suspended, but the district would not say how long. When the parents went to the school to talk to the principal, things escalated.
Well, they said I hit Mr. Hall upside the head and beat him all up. And
didn't touch the man. He touched the door.
And I touched the door to open the door. He pushed the door back away from me, and that's the only contact we had.
To come over, and he said, "I want y'all to leave."
After speaking with the undersheriff, Mr. Jones willingly went to the Choctaw County Sheriff's Office where he was arrested for assault and battery. He has been banned from school premises until a school board hearing in March. Sheriff Terry Park says due to social media threats made over the weekend, he and his deputies will remain at the school for several more days.
We at the Choctaw County Sheriff's Department have decided to sit here for a few days to make sure that those children that want to attend school and get their learning is able to have a safe and peaceful environment.
The school district refused to comment on this story. In Fort Towson, Michael Deere, News 12.
Because ugly white women used to say they got raped by niggas. Hey, a nigger raped me. Yeah, and guys be going, hey, you sure? They go round up some niggers, like, you were down last week, you know what to do, don't you? Well, come on down again, will you? We got to have a lineup. It was a lot of fun unless you got picked. That was your ass.
It's been an awkward week if you're a fan of Nate Parker, the Hollywood actor, director, writer, and producer who broke records by acquiring $17.5 million in funding from Fox Searchlight after his film Birth of a Nation wowed crowds at the Sundance Film Festival in January, has had an old rape accusation resurface, and the details are troubling. He was accused and later acquitted of sexual assault back in 1999 when he was a college student at Penn State, a case that involved his then roommate, who actually happens to be a co-writer on the movie that many expect to get a lot of Oscar buzz. Today, another bombshell dropped in which reports say the said woman involved, in fact, committed suicide in 2012. Look, shady movie types are nothing new in Hollywood. See Bill Cosby, Woody Allen, Roman Polanski, just to name a few. But this feels gross at this moment. The story of the slave revolt of Nat Turner back in 1831 is an important one, but so is the history of the man telling said tale. I'm Clinton Yates, and that's my take.
The Birth of a Nation, a new movie based on the story of Nat Turner's slave rebellion in 1831, was poised to be one of the breakout films of the year. The same was said of its star and director, Nate Parker. That's now in question as new details have surfaced about Parker's past. In 1999, Parker and his film's co-writer, Jean Celestin, his college roommates at that time, were accused of the rape of a fellow student at Penn State. Parker was acquitted of the crime. The accuser died by suicide in 2012. The allegations resurfaced in the last week thanks to the spotlight brought on by the buzz of the new film. Earlier today, I spoke with Brent Lang about the case. He's a reporter with Variety magazine. And a warning to our listeners, this is going to be a detailed conversation about sexual assault.
Mr. Celestin and Mr. Parker were accused of raping the female in question. She claimed that after a night of drinking, she passed out at Mr. Parker's apartment, and she awoke to find out that she was having intercourse, not even just with Mr. Parker, but with his roommate. Mr. Parker and Mr. Celestin both acknowledged that they had a sexual encounter with the woman, but they claimed that it was consensual.
How did these trials end?
So Mr. Parker was exonerated in his trial, and part of the reason that the jury found him to be not guilty seems to be the fact that he had had a consensual sexual encounter with the female the day before the alleged rape took place. Mr. Celestin was found guilty, but that verdict was later overturned, and a retrial never took place, reportedly because the accuser was uncomfortable with having to testify again.
Now, what new information has come out that's forced us back into the spotlight?
Well, two things there. First of all, Mr. Parker's public profile was relatively low. So even though this was a piece of his biography that was publicly available on Wikipedia, and he had answered some questions in the media about it before, it was not widely known. It also came out this week, Variety reported, that the female accuser actually ended up committing suicide in 2012.
Nate Parker hasn't been shy about trying to explain this. He's tried to speak out in the last few days. What has he had to say?
Yes, Mr. Parker posted a message on Facebook in which he expressed sympathy for the woman and her family, saying that, he acknowledged that this trial had been an ordeal, but he maintained his innocence. And the woman's family is somewhat divided. A statement from the family to the New York Times said that they sort of questioned the motivation for why this was coming out again, and said that they wanted people to respect their privacy. But some family members have spoken to media indicating that they are upset that Mr. Parker is receiving some public attention for this movie, and that they are still angry about the legal process.
What's distinctive about the way Nate Parker is responding to all this? As we said, he was acquitted. He's talked about being cleared of wrongdoing, yet it seems like he's taken a different approach than we've seen other Hollywood figures who have had accusations of sexual assault and other charges kind of thrown their way.
Well, I think he seems to be wanting to try to take this head on. He did sit for interviews with a number of publications. Some of that may have been an effort to hopefully answer those questions and to get it behind him in advance of the film's release later this year. It's unclear if this will end up working. Crisis PR veterans seem to be somewhat divided about the wisdom of this move. They seem to think that in some ways he maybe opened himself up to more questions.
That's Brent Lang, a senior reporter for Variety magazine. Thanks for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Come here, Susie. You remember me? Your daddy's friend, Henry?
No, don't!
I'm Heather Vogel with ProPublica, and I'm talking today with 3 reporters from the Indy Star newspaper, Marissa Kwiatkowski, Mark Alicia, and Tim Evans, about their incredible report on sexual misconduct by gymnastics coaches affiliated with USA Gymnastics, the nonprofit responsible for developing the United States gymnastics team for the Olympics. The reporters discovered that the organization had a policy related to reporting such abuse that was almost sure, experts say, to discourage people from speaking up about it. These are stunning revelations on a subject that's very hard to report, and I imagine the gymnastics world is pretty insular. So, first of all, just kudos to all of you for your hard work bringing this to light. And I know that work isn't done yet. Thanks, Marissa, Mark, and Tim, for being here. I'm hoping y'all can just tell me a little bit about how you first got onto this story.
Sure. So we initially received a tip about this story out of other reporting that we'd been doing about failures to report child sexual abuse in local school districts and daycares. And as we were doing sort of a broader story about why is this so common, why does this keep happening in all of these different locations, we received a tip about USA Gymnastics having a policy of not reporting all allegations of sexual abuse involving its coaches.
But now tell me a little bit, first of all, what USA Gymnastics is, just for listeners who may not be completely aware of the organization. Why is it important, and why are you all interested in Indiana in it?
USA Gymnastics is the legally designated national governing body for the sport in the United States. It is responsible for not only developing and producing Olympic teams and teams for international competition, but also sanctioning competition at the local level. Its members include 3,000 gyms nationwide. I think it's about 121,000 athletes and coaches. The members range all the way from the people you'll see at the Olympics to kids just getting started in the sport, not even at a competitive level.
It's a nonprofit, right?
It is.
And do they hire the coaches, or is it the gyms that hire the coaches? Is there sort of a step between them? But they do certify them? Is that how it works? Or what is the process? What is their relationship with the coaches?
They don't hire the coaches. The coaches are members, and they must adhere to standards set by USA Gymnastics. And USA Gymnastics is headquartered in Indianapolis, so that's another reason that we were keenly interested in this. But they don't hire or directly supervise the coaches.
Tell me some more about that policy that you got the tip about. You didn't actually get a tip about a case in that instance. You actually started with a policy. Is that right?
We had received a tip about sort of a broader policy of handling, but the revelations of that policy, the officials talking about that policy, did come out of a court case in Georgia. And basically what we found through, depositions and other records in the case is that 2 former USA Gymnastics executives said that they had a policy of dismissing allegations of sexual abuse as hearsay unless they came directly from a victim or a victim's parent, which is something that legal and child welfare advocates told us is not a good policy to have.
How is this similar, and how is it different from what the newspaper had found in schools and daycares, for instance? Was this a gray area, or was this clearly a problem? I mean, how did you draw this particular organization sort of into your view of looking at how this mandatory reporter laws work?
I think what makes this different from the writing that we had done and the investigations that we've done relating to public and private schools and daycares failing to report is that those were really individual officials' decision-making. The assistant principal who was talking to HR, or it was the head of school who didn't make the report or something like that. What made USA Gymnastics different through our investigation is that they actually had a policy, an executive policy, of how they handle all of these allegations. So it wasn't just a case-by-case basis. It was more of a broad policy for handling these situations.
And that policy was, on its face, problematic. Tell me some more about that and why it was problematic.
Well, what legal and child welfare experts told us is that this policy sort of flies in the face of best practice because, often the victim doesn't want to put that in writing or go straight to authorities. They may tell a friend or a trusted adult or someone like that, but they're actually putting it in writing and sending it to the organization. In some ways, experts told us, is a deterrent to reporting.
Because it creates a hurdle?
Partly because of what Marissa said, and then also partly because of a message that we've been told by people that it sends a message to other victims out there that the hurdles are so high that nothing's going to happen anyways, and often people are reluctant to come forward anyways. And if you make the hurdle even higher than it needs to be, then you're not helping things.
You'd said in a video that accompanied your articles that sexual misconduct has haunted USA Gymnastics for decades. Can you tell me and also explain to listeners a little bit more about that? I mean, people are probably aware of things that have occasionally popped up in the news, but did you all start looking a little bit at the history of the organization?
We did. USA Gymnastics started what they call a list of permanently ineligible members. We've just been calling it the banned coaches list. There are currently 107 people on that list, and it goes back to the 1990s. And one of the things we did was we looked at this list as it was published in 2 USA Gymnastics publications that are available online going back to the 70s. And we plotted when some of these coaches started showing up on the list compared to when they were convicted. And we found in numerous situations there were long lapses of time between when a person was convicted and when they showed up on this banned coaches list. So the idea of this issue going back decades pretty much just comes from that, from the banned coaches list.
So that gave you a sense of a little bit of the scope of what could be out there, I would imagine, from looking at historically. And you would probably know that what you were seeing was only the tip of the iceberg, knowing that so many of these cases don't end up in convictions, certainly.
That and just to add on to that, in depositions in the court case with former USA Gymnastics presidents, they did, dating back into the 90s, talk about that was an issue that they were dealing with back then as well. So there's also, not only documentation and records, but there's testimony about how this has been something that they've been needing to address for a long time.
And since our story, we've had people come forward and say it's been going on much longer than you think. We've had people saying it's been going on since the 70s and the 80s, and there are a lot of documented cases, newspaper articles, those kind of things. So it's probably not unique to USA Gymnastics. It's it's been a societal problem, and it shows up in lots of youth-serving organizations.
Yeah, why don't you tell me a little bit more about the reaction to the story? Were you just hearing mostly about more cases involving USA Gymnastics? Was it, as you suggested, other different youth-serving organizations? Or how much have your phones been ringing since you published?
We set up a hotline and also an email address box to take stories. And we've had been swamped with calls and emails, many about USA Gymnastics specifically, but others about other organizations. And our effort in this always was to take a deeper look and a broader look. If people that are listening to this have stories they'd like to share with us, the hotline number is 317-444-6262, 317-444-6262, or they can email us at investigations@indystar.com. As this goes on, we'll be broadening out, looking at other organizations and the broader issue of failure to report and the horrible impact that has on the victims and survivors.
Now, tell me a little bit more about the Jane Doe lawsuit that was filed in April in Georgia. That was William McCabe, correct?
Correct. William McCabe was a coach and a then USA Gymnastics member who worked in a number of states, including Florida and Georgia. We also have some indication that he may have been in Pennsylvania and Ohio as well, and a number of other states. But allegations followed William McCabe throughout his coaching career, and we know that through those court records and through that lawsuit that USA Gymnastics became aware of William McCabe and allegations of misconduct against him as early as 1998, when several gym owners sent letters to USA Gymnastics expressing concern about how he was interacting with people in the gym, underage individuals in the gym. For example, he said that he had gotten a 15-year-old down to her underwear and wanted to sleep with her very soon, and different things like that. And so the lawsuit relates to a young woman, a victim who was secretly videotaped while she was changing clothes in McCabe's gym, and that was in 2005 is when it was happening, but he was charged in 2006.
And then one quick clarification. You mentioned that the lawsuit was filed in April. That was actually when the plaintiff filed an amended complaint. The lawsuit's actually almost, I think, more than 3 years old now.
2013, I think, is when it was filed.
Now, you spoke with one of the victims' mothers, correct?
We've spoken with a number of victims and victims' parents. Do you mean specific to the Georgia suit?
Yes. What did she tell you, and how did she view the situation? What was her take on what had happened and on what USA Gymnastics had to do with it, essentially?
I'm going to let Marissa answer that, but I want to just interject one thing. Marissa did the interview, but one of the things that stood out the most to me was the comment that he could have been stopped long before he got to our town. And that is just that kind of at the heart of it. And it's what we've seen looking at many other coaches where they bounce from gym to gym. People either don't report them or they get in trouble and they quietly leave town and go to another gym. And, McCabe went around for maybe 10 years. And that summed up the interview. But Marissa can tell you more in detail.
Yeah, I think Kim did a great job of sort of summing up her thought process. And what she told us was that she feels that USA Gymnastics failed and that USA Gymnastics had enough information to have done something about it. And she said, it didn't have to happen to my daughter and it didn't have to happen to other little girls.
Wow, that's really powerful. Can you tell me about the 3 other cases that you tracked down details about?
Sure. Well, one was local. It involved a coach of 2 Olympians named Marvin Sharp from Indianapolis. And he was arrested late last year, on child abuse charges. And he ended up killing himself in jail. And we were able to find a letter that had been sent to USA Gymnastics 4 years earlier expressing concerns, detailed concerns, and saying he shouldn't be around children. They did not report that to law enforcement. They did, however, report in late 2015, USA Gymnastics, they are the ones who reported to law enforcement, reported Marvin Sharp after receiving another complaint. And that led to his arrest. But 4 years earlier, they did nothing. There's another case in Tennessee, a man by the name of Mark Schiefelbein, who had bounced from gym to gym over the years, sort of a classic case of complaints having been compiled. The victim's father said it was a file 3 inches thick when it was finally revealed in court. The victim was 10 years old, had been molested for about a year, told her mother finally. They reported him to authorities. There was a trial. He was convicted, sent to jail for 96 years. That was later reduced to 36. But what was unique about that situation is the family and the victim, who's now 26, herself a mother, spoke very openly, very movingly to us, especially, well, they're all on the record, especially Becca Seaborn was the victim, and we did a whole story on her, and it was deeply moving. The parents, of course, are outraged at USA Gymnastics not having warned anyone about the coach. And Becca, I thought, was quite brave in trying to talk about how those incidents, having been molested, doesn't define her for the rest of her life. Then there was one more, and Marissa knows more about that one, James Bell.
So we know through court records that USA Gymnastics had a sexual misconduct complaint file about Coach James Bell at least 5 years before he was arrested in Rhode Island in 2003 for molesting 3 young gymnasts. And we don't know what allegations were contained in that file. We know through records that USA Gymnastics compiled at least 54 complaint files relating to allegations of sexual misconduct against 54 coaches between 1996 and 2006. And we know that James Bell is one of those files, but we have a motion to intervene in the lawsuit in Georgia to try and get access to those documents and make them available to the public to see how they were handled by USA Gymnastics. But specific to James Bell, when we investigated his background, we found prior police reports about him in Oregon dating back to 1990. There was an underage gymnast who told police that Bell had climbed on top of her and wanted to take off her pants. In 91, there was a 10-year-old gymnast who said that Bell stuck his hand inside her shirt and had pinched her chest. But he wasn't charged in those cases, and he continued coaching until he was reported to police in Rhode Island for that case. And he actually was only sentenced last year, so he was charged in 2003, but he went on the run in 2004 and eluded authorities until 2015, spring of last year, when he was ultimately caught and pleaded guilty.
Wow.
And this is a guy who was on America's Most Wanted, and he was among Rhode Island's Most Wanted list, but he wasn't on the USA Gymnastics banned coaches list.
That's incredible.
This feels gross.
I am not a role model. I'm not paid to be a role model. Paid to wreak havoc on the basketball court.
Time and again, Olympic officials stress the games are not a place for politics. It's a time for athletes to rise above. Well, one Olympian who disagrees is John Carlos.
He won the bronze medal for the 200-meter dash in the 1968 Mexico City Olympics. Along with gold medalist Tommy Smith, he became famous for one powerful gesture at the medal ceremony. The 2 black athletes raised their fists during the national anthem. It was an act of protest over racial inequality, and it caused an uproar. John Carlos joined us from his home in Georgia. And remind us of that moment. How much of a political statement did you intend to make?
Well, we were making a humanitarian statement. Now, if you have to cross the lines of politicism, then so be it. But we were there basically making concerns about people that was less fortunate in this society in which we live.
Although at the time, with that clenched fist, it was read by many as a Black Power salute.
Now,
and this at a time...
I don't believe it was read by many as a Black Power salute. I think what happened was, I think they were influenced by headlines by the right-wing press that was put out there relative to us being black militants and we trying to burn down America and burn down the Statue of Liberty, which was total nonsense.
So it wasn't for you or Tommy Smith a Black Power salute?
Black Power was our black butts running down that track. That was the power right there in itself.
Years later, John Carlos would say he could still feel fire. But immediately after making that statement on the Olympic podium, life, he says, was hell. Over the next decade, Carlos says he lost friends, his family came under fire, and after his marriage fell apart, his wife committed suicide. But still, John Carlos remained active in the world of sports. So now, 48 years later, you've spoken out for black athletes. You've also written, and I'm quoting here, if you're famous and you're black, you have to be an activist.
Well, I think that if you're famous and you're black, you have an opportunity to be a voice for the voiceless. It's your responsibility to realize that although you made it in this bubble, so to speak, 99.9% of the people from your environment has not made it in that bubble. And if I stood on 125th Street in front of Apollo and said certain things, I don't think I would reach as many people as I would have reached had gone to Mexico City to speak about the issues.
Are you watching the Olympics?
Yes, matter of fact, I'm missing the Olympics right now as I'm interviewing with you.
When you watch the Olympics today, do you see any difference at all? I mean, Usain Bolt, for heaven's sakes. Do you see a different world from the world that you were in 1968 in Mexico City?
Well, let me tell you something. Mr. Bolt is doing a fantastic job in terms of promoting the sport of track and field, and I could say athletics in general. The young black swimmer, the first black woman to win a gold medal. I sit back and I marvel about her because that was my ideas as a young kid, 7, 8 years old, to go to the Olympic Games as a swimmer, telling my dad I was going to be the first black swimmer to represent America. But based on the color of my skin, that wasn't possible at that particular time. So for her to be there, it just bewilders me as to how much time is taken before we can see a black man or a black woman in the swimming pool and doing well to represent America. Racism and prejudice and bias is a very serious illness that we have in society that we need to doctor up and try and have these things resolved.
Would you imagine any of these young athletes that you're looking at raising a fist in protest in the way that you did?
Life is like a finger painting. You understand? Remember when you was in grade school and they gave you a piece of paper and the paint and tell you to do your thing? Well, that's what everyone has to do, is their thing. They can't do my thing. They have to do their own thing.
Well, Dr. Carlos, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I might add at the same time, the Olympic Games are still the greatest sporting spectacle in the world. And I would just hope that we would get to the point where we can resolve all of these social issues and political issues that we have. You started out saying about a political statement. And, people put emphasis on that we were the ones that brought politics to the Olympic Games. But I notice every time I see an athlete win, regardless of what nation it is, the first thing they do is throw a flag down to the kid. Is that not politics?
That was John Carlos, who won a bronze medal in the 1968 Olympics.
Let's bring in my man, Charles Barkley, of course, a basketball Hall of Famer, two-time Olympic gold medalist, and just one of the greatest people of all time hanging out with us here right now. And Charles, thanks so much for hanging out with me today, man. And first of all, I got to get your opinion on this whole Ryan Lochte situation. Apparently, he's fabricated this situation. If he has fabricated this story, what do you think should be the proper punishment, if punishment should be given to him at all?
Well, I don't think there's a punishment. I think that he's learned a very valuable lesson. Listen, being famous or in the limelight, it's great 2 out of 3 times. When you doing great, it's great. When you get your paycheck, it's great. But when you do something wrong, it sucks. So it's a good learning experience for him. I mean, being famous, it's great 2 out of 3 times. But when you do something wrong or you lose, it's awful. But every time, when they talk good about you when you're winning and when you get your paycheck, it's great. So, it was obviously stupid to do, but he's a young kid, and hey, all young kids do stupid stuff.
I'm Carol Hills, and this is The World. It's day 13 of the Rio Olympics, and it seems everyone in Rio and beyond wants to know, did Ryan Lochte and 3 other U.S. Olympic swimmers make up that story about being robbed at gunpoint? That's what authorities in Brazil have been saying today, and that's why 2 of the 4 swimmers were unceremoniously pulled off a plane last night just as they were about to leave the country. Earlier, I spoke with The World's Will Carlos in Rio to find out what police are alleging.
They're saying that the swimmers just simply lied about being attacked, about being robbed, and that what seems to have happened was that in the early hours of Sunday morning, there was some sort of an altercation at a gas station. Apparently, the swimmers barged through a toilet door, were then confronted by a security guard, and then after some discussion, paid for the damage that was caused, I guess, on the spot with cash. So a little bit different to a robbing. Now, of course, that's not completely confirmed, but that's what police sources are telling media across Brazil and international media too.
Do we know yet whether the swimmers were intoxicated when all of this did or did not happen?
Yeah, well, we do. I mean, they've admitted that they were.
What do Brazilians make of all this?
Brazilians are, they started off with sort of a bit of frustration, sort of going, things were going so well, and now we've had this high-profile attack, and isn't it a shame? To now, very quickly, very early on, the moment the suggestion came out that Lochte might be not telling the truth on this, Brazilians got on social media and started really kind of pouring scorn on these guys. They've become real villains here, and it's really making the whole. It should be said, it's casting a new light on the whole Olympic team here, the U.S. Olympic team. When you have these ambassadors for the team, at the very least, sort of acting like high school kids or at least college kids, it doesn't reflect well on the whole U.S. team. And I think it's really been an opportunity for people who have some criticism of the United States to kind of come out and make that criticism heard.
What about the feeling that it was kind of melodramatic for Brazilian officials to pull these two guys off the plane, two of the swimmers? If there was a warrant, why didn't they just get barred at check-in? It all seems it seems to some people like a little overkill.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the sort of the technicalities of it, why were they pulled off the plane and not stopped at check-in? I mean, Brazil's not the most organized of places. I mean, Ryan Lochte arguably should have been stopped from leaving, but he got on a plane. Now, as far as were they justified in kind of going and finding these guys? You'll get mixed responses on that. I mean, I would urge listeners to sort of put this the other way around and say, imagine these were two Brazilian athletes in the United States who are accused of what's really quite a serious crime. I mean, making a false accusation of a crime is in itself a crime in Brazil. I think most people would see the American authorities as fully within their rights to stop these people from leaving the United States.
Is anyone giving any indication of why they made this up in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question. And I mean, there are all sorts of theories flying around. There are people saying, could it be he was trying to sort of make excuses to his girlfriend back home as to why he was out so late, or to his mom? I guess the genesis of all of this was a conversation that Ryan Lochte had with his mother, which then, I believe she then went to the media and sort of reported this, and he was then interviewed by NBC News and sort of went and said everything that had happened. But, I mean, who knows? I mean, were they so drunk that they didn't realize that the security guard was really a security guard, and that when they were paying over for the damage, they weren't really being robbed? Your guess is as good as mine, but certainly there's a number of different theories. Whether we'll get to the bottom of it, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's going to be a lot more complicated than it first looked.
The world's Will Carlos in Rio. Thanks, Will.
Thank you very much.
Because, you look at some of these other people who win a gold medal, it's the highlight of their life. I mean, think about that. I saw that young kid from Wade Newkirk from South Africa who got to run because his mom didn't get to run because of apartheid. Mm-hmm. Him winning that gold medal is going to be the greatest thing happen to him in his life.
Said, what's the word? Tell me, brother, have you heard from Johannesburg?
Our lead story the whole day, of course, remembering the Marikana massacre 4 years ago. I think it's one of the, it's hard to callously pick between which is the worst blight on our democracy. Absolutely horrendous set of events, but also 4 years since justice has been fully enjoyed by the family and the community particularly affected by the Marikana massacre. I wonder what you make now, reflecting back on the Marikana massacre of that moment, which I think really brought our democracy to its knees by just demonstrating some continuities with the violent apartheid state that we all would have thought and hoped we would not carry into our democracy. 011-883-0702. Do give us a call. And in Cape Town on 021-446-0567. I'm also joined now by Director of Litigation at Socio-Economic Rights Institutes at SERI, Nomzamo Zondo. Nomzamo, thank you so much for coming onto the show today.
It's a pleasure, Eusebius. Good morning.
I don't even know where to start because when we think about what's happened, the Farlam Commission, Lonban's role, flouting their social responsibility. I was saying to my producers this morning that although I'd like to discuss with you questions around housing for the miners, etc., in a sense, I want to start with the big picture, Nomzamo, and just get your reflections, not just as, from a public interest litigation point of view, but as a South African. What comes up for you today as we look back?
Look, Eusebius, the 16th of August 2012 is a moment of national shame for all South Africans. And it's sad that as we sit here and stand here 4 years later and nothing has been done about it. No one has been criminally prosecuted. No reparations have been paid to the families. And in effect, the government hasn't really accounted and even apologized, firstly to those affected and then to the country as a whole for what happened on the 16th of August 2012.
And what then is the state of litigation, both from a point of view of justice in terms of retribution for the massacre, and then also in terms of compensation? Just bring us up to speed with what is fact.
So you say this at the end of last year, the state made an announcement to the media that they will be settling the claims. This was something that came as a relief to the families, and we were surprised because nothing had been said to us. But we were eventually invited to a meeting that happened in January of this year. At that meeting, the state said to us they do want to settle the claims. They accept liability and they accept that they are responsible for the massacre, but that they would want to start a process where the claims can be adjudicated. So the first disappointment for us is that we're now talking about a process. We had hoped they would go there, would get a check, or at least get figures, them saying to us, look, we are willing to settle these claims at this much. So that didn't happen. And in the process, they said to us, look, we accept liability. We want to appoint a retired judge who will then look at adjudicate these claims, then give us how much the state must pay. And we said to them, look, firstly, we're happy with the proposal, of course, having gone past our disappointment. But what we'd want to know firstly is that the families have asked for an apology from the Minister of Police. If you accept liability, will that be forthcoming? They said to us we need to get instructions on that. That was in January this year, on the 27th. We now sit on the 16th of August. They still don't have instructions. And we've had numerous letters sent to them, and they don't have instructions. We then said, we understand you want to appoint a judge, but this is a matter now where we are equal parties. There's the state, and then there's the victims. We'd want to have a hand in choosing what judge adjudicates them at, because we want someone that we'll be comfortable with. And they said to us, we're going to get instructions. Today, we still don't have a response to that. We then said to them, look, the families are living are destitute. Some families are really, really struggling. We'd like to see you making interim payments to them. If you accept liability, then you accept that there is some money that you'll have to pay. Tell us how much you're willing to pay in the meantime.
Yeah.
To date, we're still waiting for a response on that. So those settlement negotiations have not really gone anywhere, to the extent that as the family's legal representatives, we accept that maybe that process is not going to take us anywhere, that in effect we will have to finish this in court. What that then means is that we've had to engage psychologists who must then prove the fact that the families have suffered emotional shock. They must prove the fact that the young children are suffering from a lack of parental care, having lost their fathers, and must prove that these families are suffering from grief. Now, these are things that are known. I mean, we know that in 2012, immediately after the massacre, we had 2 family members dying alongside and being buried at the same time as the deceased miners. We know some of the widows miscarried. As recently as early this year, we had a 14-year-old boy hang himself because in his community, he's being told your father was a multi-crazed miner who attacked the police.
Sure.
In his community, he's being ridiculed. And he because of that, he felt that he couldn't live anymore. And this was a 14-year-old. So the amount of stress and the trauma that those events have brought to the families is really unimaginable. Now we sit here and we must now get psychologists and also pay money. So while no money is going to the families, we are sending money to other people. So we've already spoken about how much money has been spent on the Marikana Commission of Inquiry. But even as we go on, no money is being given to the families. But again, money is being spent on lawyers, money is being spent on other experts.
Now, Nomzamo, and I know this is speculative, but honestly, I mean, what is your take on why the government would be so tardy. One doesn't need forensic psychology reports to understand the trauma. I mean, this was national trauma for those of us who didn't even have proximity to the event, let alone if you're actually a family member directly implicated by the violence that happened that day with the slaughtering of so many men. What is behind it? Is it in the best case scenario, a bona fide concern about false claims, or is it, in the worst case scenario, just a shambles when it comes to political responsibility and the shame of owning up?
I think it's definitely the shame of they don't want to own up to the massacre. I mean, that's why when last year they said they will settle the claims, we thought that was the best thing to do. In effect, me personally, I don't even understand why we were forced to go to a commission of inquiry when that could have been just up front. They could have said, we want a commission of inquiry, but even before we go there, we want to do right by these people. As we sit here, Eusebius, the miners who are alleged to be involved in the killing of other people at the Gopi have been going to prostitution for years. But even today, not even a single policeman has been charged. Even those policemen who, on their own versions, are guilty. So policemen have said, I shot someone 10 times in self-defense. If I shoot someone at my gate, because I think they're trying to break into my house, I would be charged. So on what basis has there been no criminal prosecution, apart from a refusal from the state to take responsibility? Secondly, for the state not wanting to acknowledge the humanity of these families and the humanity of the men they killed on that mountain. So as for the state, we're still back on the 16th of August 2012 when Ria Pierre congratulated, 17th, when she congratulated the police saying, this is the best of possible policing. Because if it wasn't the best of responsible policing, the state would have come out and said, we are ashamed of what has happened, and we are going to remedy that. We'll do everything possible to make sure that you don't get to suffer alone.
Now, Zama, I want to talk a little bit about Lonman as well, but before I do that, let's just tie up the conversation about the state. Where to from here then to force the state's hand from a social justice point of view?
You see, the unfortunate thing, you say, is that we are stuck within the confines of the law. The law says, as I've said, the families must now go through psychologists, and the law might even demand that the families must go to court and give evidence on their suffering. While at the same time, the policemen who shot will be protected by their concession of liability. So there'll be no one who's saying, why did you shoot? Why did you decide to shoot 20 times? What were you scared of? But then poor Mrs. Mchazi will have to stand there and say, this is my son. He was my pride and joy. He's the person who made sure that I had food on the table. And then have someone from the state interrogate her. And unfortunately, that's what the law requires. So we're now stuck in then complying with the law's processes, which means we must go through this process of getting psychologists to speak to 320 claimants and write reports for 320 claimants. It was hard enough for us. It took us, I think, almost a month to arrange for those consultations. Let alone how much time will it take us to review all the reports that will come from that process. But that's what the law says. So the law, in this case, is not delivering justice. And we would have hoped that the South African government, as the father of the families, as the father of the deceased miners, would have said, as we see that this is wrong.
Okay,
let's see what has gone wrong here. We don't need to prove it anymore.
They are feral rats. Feral rats.
The mobs were feral.
Feral rats.
I saw an image of a boy, a black boy making a white boy stripped in the street. To me, those things are reprehensible. And those people should have more than the book thrown at them.
His prophecy was absolutely right.
I'm ashamed to be a black guy seeing a lot of young other black people causing this trouble and bringing our names down.
5 years ago this month, a young black man was shot dead by police. Protests erupted in the city. Sounds like what's happened recently in many American cities, but we're talking here about London, England, and those protests escalated into riots. The world's Leo Hornak lives in London now, as he did back in 2011. So just remind us, Leo, why did these riots start and how much of an effect did they have?
They were huge, Jeb. I mean, not just for London, but for Britain and maybe Europe as a whole. I think the effect that these riots had on my city, I think, changed it for a whole generation. The reason they started is extremely controversial and complicated, but essentially a young black man, Mark Duggan, was shot dead by police. There were local community protests against the police as a result of that. And then that turned into rioting, and that turned into looting, which quickly spread across the city in multiple locations. And over the course of a week, those riots then spread across the whole country. I mean, I remember the experience as just a Londoner at that time. I remember my mother calling me and saying that my sister was really worried because she was looking out of her window and seeing men with baseball bats walking along the street, smashing every car window. Or I remember standing at a bus stop, for example, and hearing two people next to me discuss where you could get the best free stuff from looted shops in my neighborhood. So it was something that was a huge news event, and then also at the same time it was weirdly local. It was just what people were talking about just at the bus stop.
And you've been to meet one family in London who were particularly affected, the Kermes. Who are they?
Right, well, Amrit and Ravi Kerme, they run a small convenience store in a suburb of London called Ealing. And they'd always had it as their ambition to run their own store, and they'd been actually managing to do that for some years, a small independent store. Maybe it's like the British equivalent of a bodega. But then the riots happened. Now, Amrit, she took me out across the street to show me exactly where things began to happen on that day. Here's what she told me, Jeb.
Oh, it was a horror. We came back and stood just exactly over there. This was full of people with the masks on and everything, and our shop was getting looted, the windows were broken, and we couldn't do anything. My husband wanted to go in and he wanted to stop them, and I was holding him back. I was just crying. I was on the phone. I said to Ravi, we cannot stop. It's not in our hands. We had to just stand over there, watch our shop being destroyed, our livelihood being destroyed. And I remember one of the girls, she said to me, she was coming out with lots of things, and she said to me, "You can go in, there's plenty inside." And I couldn't tell her. I was so scared that this is my store you're doing to. I just had to stand there, watch.
Imagine watching your own store looted. How are they doing now? What happened?
Well, she, as you can almost hear from that clip, she became quite emotional. I did as well when she was just describing it. How they're doing now? Well, it's been a very, very hard 5 years. I mean, things like the insurance didn't pay out, and they've got 2 kids, 2 teenage girls at that time. It's been really, really hard. And here's what Amrit told me about how they've had to cope since then.
It's taught us a lot. It's shown us anything can change, any time. So and it's brought us together as a family, because we had to suffer together, 4 of us. The girls had to stop a lot of things because there was no money. They were doing their music lessons. They were doing, but we couldn't do it because we just had to provide bread and butter. That was our main priority. So it was difficult.
Leo, could this happen again in London?
Well, Amrit and Ravi, they both say, yeah, they think it could. The factors that caused the rioting, so far as we can tell what they were, are still there. The sense of injustice that led to the protests, the sense of there being a 1% and a 99%. These are all familiar things for US cities. So the preconditions that were there, they're still there. And who knows? I think there's every chance in a way that we could one day wake up to the same kind of thing.
Well, let's hope not. The World's Leo Hornak in London. Thank you very much.
Listen, just touching on some real issues right here tonight. That's all. I want y'all to observe the excellence here. BX providing the Sonics, my man, Minnesota. I'm letting the beat ride out because it's a part that I like when it come up, you know what I'm saying? I take this time to say what's up to my family. You hear that? You know what I'm saying?
For sure.
Just observe the excellence of that. That's many.
Hey, back. Fall back.
With the guitars. It's hip-hop music. It's good enough to speak for itself. And you got to do right by it. Minnesota.
Ain't no black people in Minnesota. The week I went to the Twin Cities, protesters closed highways twice, jamming traffic for hours. That's a big deal in Minneapolis, as it would be in any city, and it seemed to split white liberals. On Twitter and in the comment sections of news stories, People who self-identified as white wrote that they were sympathetic to the Black Lives Matter cause, but they didn't understand how closing highways is productive. Filson Ibrahim, the 27-year-old Somali-American and Black Lives Matter member in the first part of this episode, had this response when I asked her about it.
Don't read the comments.
Yeah, I know.
That's first and first. Just don't read the comments. But the fact that you're talking about it, the fact that you're bothered, the fact that you're aware of what Black Lives Matter is, that's why we're blocking the roads. The fact that our lives are daily destructed, disturbed, and you can go on and never be affected by that. That's why we make you uncomfortable, because we've been uncomfortable like our whole lives. And the fact that you're feeling this now makes it all worth it, because there's no debating it now.
And that's where I got the idea for this part of the episode. It's about feelings and the unexpected power they can have, like the feeling of fearing law enforcement.
People really, really ran away from police. Police was like the most scariest thing you could think about.
And the feelings that you struggle to put into words.
When we heard them say a concept, we would just say, the thing you're talking about is impunity. The thing you're talking about is propaganda. The thing you're talking about is racism.
But first, feeling safe.
There's a defining moment that's happening here. And if you're playing Pokemon Go, you're missing it, you know?
I'm Rupa Shenoy, and this is Otherhood. Summer in Minnesota began with bitter disappointment for people who want police reform. In June, prosecutors announced they wouldn't press charges against the officers who killed Jamar Clark, the young black man witnesses said was shot while his hands were cuffed behind his back. Things just got worse in July. An officer in the suburbs pulled Philando Castile over for a broken taillight and fatally shot him. Minnesota's governor, the liberal Democrat Mark Duggan, expressed shock that something like that could happen in Minnesota, a state known for its progressiveness.
I'm heartbroken for Minnesota because would this have happened if those passengers, the driver and the passengers were white? I don't think it would have. So I'm forced to confront, and I think all of us in Minnesota are forced to confront, that this kind of racism exists, and that it's incumbent upon all of us to vow that we're going to do whatever we can to see that it doesn't continue to happen.
Some police slammed Dayton for those comments. Protesters wanted to make sure he lived up to the sentiment. They set up a camp outside his house. Demonstrations throughout the Twin Cities grew bigger and bolder. Charmaine Chua was at one 4 days after Philando Castile died.
I just answered a call that had been put out on Facebook and wasn't there with any particular group, but showed up with just some friends.
She and other protesters stormed a highway ramp, evaded officers, and rushed onto I-94, the crucial road that connects the two downtowns of the Twin Cities. Organizers in a truck were shouting directions.
The Black Lives Matter organizers who were on the truck and making the announcements made a call for white allies to come up to the front. And I believe the call went something like this: white allies, we're asking that you link arms and take the front lines of this blockade. You will most certainly be arrested, but we are asking that you risk yourselves and put your bodies on the line for us. And black and brown folks, we recognize that you are much more at risk from police brutality, and so they basically made a call for black and brown folks to remain in the center of the circle and that they could choose not to be arrested as long as they didn't want to.
At that point, Charmaine had to think a bit about where she was supposed to go. She's Chinese, from Singapore, and has been living in the Twin Cities for 7 years, working on a poli-sci PhD at the University of Minnesota. She knows there's Asian privilege, and Asians don't have to deal with a lot of the stuff black people experience.
There was certainly this sort of dilemma for me because I wanted to risk myself and I wanted to stand with, the white allies on the front lines. But I also decided at the end of the day that in order for me to continue being able to be part of social movements in the U.S., I had to sort of think long-term and stay back. Part of the difficulty for me is that if I get arrested in the U.S., I would risk facing either deportation, but if not, at least some complications with getting hired as a non-U.S. citizen.
So she watched as white supporters formed a human chain to separate her and other protesters from hundreds of cars.
What happened, I think, was that there were far more white allies who were willing to risk arrest than they had probably expected. Up to 3 to 4 lines deep of white allies lined up, linked arm to arm, side by side, along the highway in the front line, and black and brown protesters end up sort of being cocooned in the middle. And so it was really quite this beautiful moment because, I think one of the complicated conversations with Black Lives Matter has been around sort of what does it mean to be a white person or a non-black person involved in the protest. And in this particular instance, I thought it was really wonderful how it was in response to a call made by black organizers and black leaders that white people took the front lines. They made sure that they waited until that call was asked of them.
Beyond the circle of white supporters that surrounded them, Charmaine saw the police in riot gear advance.
At the very moment that the police sort of came, within 10 to 15 feet of the protesters, someone from over the highway on the bridge from which many people were watching threw a firework down on the police, which went up in this sort of sudden burst of flame. And watching from a slight distance, I actually couldn't tell what the firework was. It didn't occur to me that it had come from a spectator, and I assumed that it was the police using some sort of crowd dispersal device. So you could see the white allies get sort of really afraid for a moment there as the firework went up, because it was really scary. I mean, you could see the sort of sparks come out and sort of almost rain down on the crowd. Some people, in fear, naturally sort of recoiled. At that moment, one of the Black Lives Matter organizers said, hold together, hold together, don't let go, don't run.
White allies reformed their lines, stood firm, and police retreated for about an hour while traffic was stopped on the highway.
So I think the allies actually held the highway for us for a much longer time than we had anticipated.
When police finally did advance, the protest devolved into what one prosecutor later called a riot. Instigators, many of whom were never identified, were blamed for throwing bottles and bricks. Police arrested more than 100 people, many of them white. I asked Charmaine, who's been participating in protests for years, if she'd ever seen organizers talk so intentionally about race, how it works, and how they were using it in the middle of a protest.
Actually, no. I was thinking about this the other day, and I've been involved in protests in New York, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Los Angeles, but I had never before, I think, heard organizers sort of so explicitly talk about positionality in the thick of a moment of protest. And I thought it was a real testament to how well organized the Black Lives Matter coalition here really was.
And that approach of acknowledging that some people face harsher consequences than others, that made Charmaine feel way more safe.
I felt like I couldn't risk arrest, and so was in the middle of the protest and felt really safe in a way, and really grateful that I was able to both participate in the protest and show my solidarity, but that, the protest structure could recognize that I was at risk in a different way. I mean, I think that I would have left the highway much earlier if there hadn't been that call that was made, and if there hadn't been a clear sort of message from the organizers about who risked protest and who didn't. Because sometimes, in the sort of height of protest, it can be pretty chaotic, and you don't always know what the level of risk you're putting yourself in really is. But it helps that they announced that and made it clear sort of where you could stand, where you were safe, and where you weren't.
For generalities, I generally say that if you want the ultimate expression of white supremacy and the white supremacist mentality, and you want to put it in the form of one person that I would name, and that's something I very seldom do, it would be Jeffrey Dahmer.
The city of Milwaukee, to me, just lost. They care nothing about the black community as a whole.
I wanted to reach out to talk to somebody who I have been talking to and about issues like this for more than 20 years to get his take. And joining me on the line is Michael Holt, who is one of the editors of the Milwaukee Community Journal and a longtime panelist of my television show, Sunday Inside. Good morning, Michael. How are you?
Morning, Charlie. It's a very interesting time we're living in right now, particularly in Milwaukee.
Well, I described what happened over the weekend as shocking but not surprising. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I anticipated, sadly, this was going to happen a year ago. I'm only surprised that it caught us off guard because we should have been anticipated.
Okay, tell me why you were anticipating it, what you saw, what you felt, why you thought this was going to happen.
Well, there's this simmering frustration. There's this sense of hopelessness, particularly among young folks who are not as tolerant as the folks my age who want to seek solutions to problems. Milwaukee has the highest black male unemployment rate in the Western Hemisphere. More than half of all black men between 18 and 50 are unemployed. We do have this breakdown of the family, dysfunctional families. Everything has been simmering. And in the last few years that we've seen this supposed uptick in questionable police shootings, and when you couple that with all the racial profiling that takes place, this was almost inevitable.
Okay, well, let me go back to this point, because you have been making this point about the unemployment rate for several years. On my show, you've gone on record, and whatever the numbers are, I think they're ballpark true. Where's the sense of urgency? Where's the leadership? I see Khalif Rainey and I see Russell Stamper Jr., and I know you know them very well. I see them come out and they are indignant about the unfairness, the oppression, the oppression, everything. But you know what? When somebody is trying to fix Milwaukee public schools, or when they are trying to get some leadership in this community to deal with this, I don't see these guys. I don't hear these guys. If this problem is, and this problem is obviously acute, where has the outrage been? Where has the leadership been on these problems?
Well, that's one of the fallacies that is promoted by the journal media. There are many individuals working on this, but it does not get the publicity. Those who read the community journal will see some of those efforts, but there's constant, continuous efforts by a lot of different groups. Pastor United is out here. There's an older mentor group out here. I know Russell Stamper has been involved in both education and economic development issues. Khalif Rainey is new to, local politics. But, there has, the fact that an organization, which we don't necessarily have in Milwaukee, called Black Lives Matter, is criticizing questions is endemic of the problem. Because that organization exists because, from our perspective, black lives don't matter to anybody but us.
Okay, all right.
No,
I get it. Right, but Friday night we had 5 Black Lives lost.
Absolutely.
Five. No protest, no demonstrations, nothing.
Oh, there was.
Okay.
And here's my point. Because TMJ is not on the scene, or the Journal Sentinel is not on the scene, doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I think when we look at this situation, what happened over the weekend, and I went through the area, and I was a little surprised that across the street from the gas station, which had been targeted for protests several weeks before, they were selling water and barbecue and hamburgers and hot dogs. So, this has become some kind of public spectacle of some sort. But let's not paint with a broad brush. There are 3 separate and distinct groups here, and everybody's looking at one group. There were the ruffians who broke into that beauty supply place and stole things. Mm-hmm. The ones who set fire to the gas station. That is one separate and distinct group. It's a smaller of the 3.
Okay.
Then there are the young folks that my grandson is involved with, who are outraged, who would protest, who are members of or participate in the Coalition for Justice marches. And then there's the 3rd group of homeowners, working families, non-working families, ministers, community leaders. And was there any publicity that 200 of them marched yesterday and appealed for peace including the sister of the guy who was shot? Was there any publicity on that?
Well, there was, and in fact, I do think that was one of the best things that happened over the weekend. Was the people in the neighborhood who came and cleaned up, and the incidents like this do bring out the worst, but they also bring out the best. So yeah, there were. Now, the first group you described as, what was the word you used? Ruffians.
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 They're terrorists. They're the ones who are doing the shooting. They're the ones who did not burn, that duty supply place out of frustration or to make any kind of political point. They were going in there to steal something. That is a totally separate group that should be charged. And they should be ostracized, and they have been ostracized by other people who want some civil solutions to the problem.
Okay, now this is important because you're making the distinction that I wasn't hearing in some of those press conferences, making the real distinction that here are legitimate grievances and legitimate problems that we need to talk about, that we've been talking about, whether it's education or jobs or the economy, et cetera, versus the fact that you have this criminal subculture thugs who are the ones shooting at the cops and burning down the stores. These are not social justice warriors. They're not doing this in order to fight oppression. They're doing this because they have an excuse to act out. Would you disagree with me on that?
No, I totally agree. In fact, all we need to do is look at who was shot. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a store owner. It wasn't some, ambiguous oppressor. It was another black person shot by these same thugs and terrorists. My problem with the bold, broad statements of the head of the police union is he's actually lumping us all into one category. I stated on air repeatedly, we are being terrorized by these thugs and these individuals who prey on us. They are the purveyors that we have to fight. And there are groups within the black community who have even gone so far as discussing armed response to these folks.
What's happening, and I was watching this on social media, and there's so much that's out there that's pretty awful, that this was dividing up between, this was white versus black, that this was, white people versus black people versus white people. And what you're saying, though, is that you're talking about African Americans versus African Americans in those neighborhoods, and that's really the front line in neighborhoods like Sherman Park.
Absolutely. And, I used to live a few blocks away from there, on 49th and Locust. Matter of fact, when I first met my wife, her next door neighbor was Tom Berry, and then we lived there for like 10 years. It's now a rental property, and when we went back there after a tenant moved out, decided cleaning up and repairing some of the damage, there are bullet holes in the garage door. We put up a new door, and they broke in, and then they shot up the house. I was a member of that black club, and when we go to meetings to try to chase away a drug dealer, I was the only man there. And I think that's very symbolic of the problems that's taking place.
Okay, well, why would you be the only man there?
Well, half of the block was rental property, so some of those folks didn't care. Some of the men, I assume, were working when we identified a time to visit this drug dealer. But some, I guess, were just scared because there's retaliation, which a lot of folks on the outside don't understand. The guy who was shot by the police was actually charged with intimidating the witness to his crime. That's an ongoing scenario. These people, there's been other publicized events. My sister lives a few blocks away in a beautiful area right off Sherman, Grant Boulevard. She called the police, and then they turned around and terrorized her, and to the point where she moved out.
No, hold on. Who terrorized her? It was not the police who terrorized her. It was the ruffians.
No, it was the perpetrators.
Okay, so the way you're describing it, though, that in order for the community that actually cares about the neighborhood and the community and raising their families, the police have to be your ally, because where would you be?
Oh, absolutely.
Where would you be without the cops to call under these circumstances? So why is it the only time that we hear these outbursts, and maybe it's because of the media coverage, but these outbursts is when there's an opportunity to demonize the cops, as opposed to recognizing that the cops are often your ally and maybe your most important ally.
I want to be a cop. Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Saturday, August 20th, 2016. So I have been told. Compensatory call-in. If folks have commentary they would like to share, feel free to chime in. The number to dial is 641-715-3640. The code is 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. The number again, 641-715-3640. The code is 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. Couple quick things before we get to folks on the phone line who have commentary. I know we have for years had a good number of listeners in the Louisiana area. I certainly, thoughts, prayers, any folks down there who are dealing with all of the damage from the flooding. As much time as we spent talking about Hurricane Katrina and the 10-year anniversary this time last summer, to be seeing all of the historic devastation that's happening in Louisiana right now. Any listeners in that area, I hope you, your family, friends, people that you care about are safe, are not in harm's way, or are not having any damage to your residence or property or anything like that. Certainly thoughts and prayers with folks in the Louisiana area. Thankfully, it might have just been that it was not reported, because that certainly happened with Hurricane Katrina, but at least thus far I have not seen any reports of black people directly being terrorized during this event on the level of what happened with Hurricane Katrina, but certainly feel free to update me if I just have missed that information. But that is extremely important, what's happening right now in the state of Louisiana. Next up, just a few quick comments. I wanted to make sure that we got in before we get to the callers. Second thing, the situation with the school where it was a black female student. She was called a nigger. She told her brothers. They went to find the little racist who had been terrorizing verbally their sister, and they, according to the report, they admitted that they assaulted this little racist, and then they were reprimanded and suspended from school for whatever the period of time they didn't specify. And then when these black children's parents went to the school to try to remedy the problem, the parents were removed from the school grounds. The police were called. The father, black father, he was charged. I thought that was significant for many reasons. We've talked about, this is what you can expect in the system of white supremacy from the racist school system. However, I think this is another illustration. I talked about this, I think, 2 weeks ago. They had the spitting incident in Chicago, and people were saying, black people are cowards. That's why this sort of thing keeps happening. Black people don't fight back. Standard, that's almost a root response from many whites and many non-whites. That was even in Django Unchained. And I said that is completely false. There are so many reports of black people resorting to counter violence in response to racism, white supremacy. This is often exactly what you can expect to happen. Again, I'm not telling anyone to not resort to counter violence. If you deem that that is the approach that needs to be taken, if you think, hey, this is what needs to happen, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the system of white supremacy seems to have a pretty solid track record for how they respond when a victim of racism resorts to counter violence. It seems like they have been able to suppress that, to deal with that pretty effectively over the years worldwide. I could be in error, but I did think that that was significant. Also, number 3, we'll be here tomorrow, Global Sunday Talk on Racism, encouraging our folks, international listeners, to dial in, share their thoughts. It'll be 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. I certainly was reminded of that, hearing the report. This is also the 5-year anniversary of the quote-unquote London riots. I would say Hurricane Katrina, the coverage that we did last year, the 10-year anniversary, signature work here at the Context of White Supremacy with the volume, different programs that we did covering that and different guests and what have you. I think we did work that I'm proud of what we were able to do. I think we got out a lot of pertinent information. I think the London riots would also qualify as signature work here at the Context of White Supremacy. We had a lot of black people in the UK, in London specifically, on the program all throughout, and again, a testament to the immaculate timing of the cows. We had a guest from the UK. We had Almost British. The author's husband was on the program. That broadcast was scheduled like a month in advance, way before Mark Duggan was shot and killed and the riots kicked off and everything. We had him on the program right in the middle. I think within 12 hours of everything started, he was on the program. So we were able to get live update from someone who was in ground zero immediately. And then pretty much for the rest of the month of August 2011, we had tons of people on the program repeatedly. I'm really looking forward to talking to some of our folks in the UK to get some of their thoughts on what has been done for the 5-year anniversary of all of that. I do think it's significant because we did do so much work on that. They left out, in terms of what started all of that in the UK, the killing of Mark Duggan, who does have a white parent, even though he's certainly classified as non-white. They said he's a black male with a white mom. That Saturday, Mark Duggan was killed on that Thursday, first Thursday in August 2011. 2 days later, that Saturday, the family, just black people that were concerned, they went to the Metropolitan Police Station to get information about what happened, why Mark Duggan was shot and killed, just, inform us, let us know what's going on. They did not get any answers, and while they were out in front of the police department, a 16-year-old black female was shoved. That was a key incident that sparked a lot of what took place. In all of that, I think that gets conveniently left out, but I think a lot of I know many of the black guests that we had on the program 5 years ago, they consistently emphasized that was a really important event that sparked a lot of what took place back in 2011. Last thing I will make sure I get in, at least at this point, I'll share a few other things as we move forward. I'd said not that long ago, I think within the last month or two, I'm totally done with name-calling on this program, name-calling of other black people. I think that's at least one point that I think we've been pretty consistent about. I think anyone who's listened to the cows over any length of time, that's something that I have consistently spoken about and made an effort to discourage, not allow on this platform, name-calling other black people. I've stated consistently, it is a disgrace of the highest order for people to talk and brother this and sister that, and I love black people, and then within the next 5 seconds, turn around and coon this and sambo that. I mean, that is a total disgrace and gets to the heart of why I almost want to vomit when someone says, oh, my black brother Gus, my brother. Get out of here with all of that. I'm restating this because I had said before, I'm done. I have no patience for name calling on the program. It happened twice. Since then, I have muted some people, but one person called and it was a first-time call, and I was like, wow, that's pretty tough to mute someone as a first-time caller. Then it happened again this week where it was a request made. The person called in from Wisconsin to share information. They are in Wisconsin. They had all the disturbances that took place this past week, and the name calling popped up there too. And I was like, wow, I'm at a dilemma here. Do I mute someone when people have asked to hear what they have to say about something that is important taking place, and they are in a better position to know about this just based on their geographic proximity? I am totally at the point, I don't care what you're talking about. If you have to name call another black person, I have zero interest in hearing anything you have to say about anything. So I'm just making this, and I'm not interested in hearing any feedback on my view on this. If you don't agree, it's no problem. You do not have to listen to the Context of White Supremacy, and you certainly don't have to call in. In fact, I will help you find another program where you can feel free to name call any and every single black person you would like, and you can put Gus T Renegade at the top of the list when you call into your other radio program. Gus is the biggest coon, Sambo, Uncle Tom in the known universe. No problem. I'll help you find a broadcast. But if it's going to be your 2-year-old child that calls in to talk about her thoughts on racism, and that has to include name-calling another black person, she's going to be muted. If you're your 112-year-old grandfather and he's calling in to talk about his centuries worth of racism, and that has to include name-calling another black person, he's going to be muted. It is a total disgrace, and I'm not promoting that at all on this broadcast. We're not going to name-call other black people. That does not help solve any problems related to racism, white supremacy. And on a final connected note, I find it astounding, even I can pose it as a question. How is it that everyone knows about Sheriff Clark in Wisconsin? I would be willing to wager a substantial amount of funds that a good chunk of listeners probably could not name 5 sheriffs in your specific state, county, parish, whatever the case may be. I'm pretty sure a good chunk of listeners couldn't name 3, 4, 5 sheriffs in your area, much less Sheriff Clark all the way in Wisconsin. He's thousands of miles away from me. I'm sure a whole lot of people, in fact, most of the people who listen to this broadcast are not in his jurisdiction at all. So Sheriff Clark is not causing you any direct problems. That just cannot be true. People who don't know, Sheriff Clark is a black male. He's on Fox News on a pretty regular basis, which is no coincidence. And he's been interviewed and given a few talks since everything that went down in Milwaukee over the past week. I am of the opinion, I have concluded, if Sheriff Clark died today, let's say he slipped on a bar of soap in the bathroom, that would not improve the situation of black people at all. We've talked about this on the program before. It might make you feel a little bit better, or I have no idea what could be motivating. I have some suspicions. What could be motivating us spending so much time focusing on individuals like the victim of white supremacy, Sheriff Clark? I would just submit he is not the person that is causing white supremacy, and name-calling him, even if we killed him, that would not improve our situation at all. Finally, I would submit I think racists have done a very good job of conditioning us to focus on other victims like Sheriff Clark. It even reminded me of the film Training Day with Denzel Washington, where he got his Academy Award. There is a very significant scene that was not in the film. If you get the DVD, it's one of the deleted scenes where he's in the car, he's having a conversation with his co-star Ethan Hawke, who's in The Purge, and he's talking about his first, time on the job when he's training, when he was a rookie. And he says that they see a black male beating a dog, and he's like, oh my gosh, why don't we go arrest him? What are we doing? He's beating this dog with a water hose. And his partner, supervisor, tells him what they're doing is training the dog to hate niggers. That's exactly what Denzel Washington says in the movie. Again, this is in the deleted scenes. In my view, racists, they do an exemplary job 24/7 training us to dislike, despise other black people, that anti-blackness critical component to why the system of racism, white supremacy is here, why Mr. Fuller, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, many others, why one of the primary things that they encourage on a regular basis, black self-respect, not name-calling other black people. That is one of the primary principles that I try to advocate here on the program. So just for added emphasis, again, do not ever call into this program if you feel that whatever you have to say has to include name-calling another black person. And again, I have zero interest in hearing feedback or disagreement or what have you. If Gus is talking crazy, again, find another program and feel free to make Gus the first person that you name-call. With that, we will get to the folks who dialed in. Again, for this program specifically, really exclusively, if we could not use metaphors, that would be helpful. I make that error myself. I do make an effort to correct, acknowledge if I include a metaphor. No, it can be difficult, but if we could make that effort to be mindful about what we are saying, that is one of the more important elements of countering racism, white supremacy, to be careful about the words that we use. It's been my experience, my conclusion, that racists routinely use metaphors to confuse what racism, white supremacy is, how it works, so that non-white people do not get an accurate understanding of the problem. I think often victims of racism, we use metaphors, analogies, comparisons, we're still learning, and sometimes just in our struggles to try to articulate our views on racism, white supremacy. We end up using metaphors that they're not accurate. They're not comparing two things that are equivalent at all. And again, that just promotes further confusion. If we could be direct, precise, exact about what it is that we're saying, that would be super appreciated. With that, we'll get to the phone lines. The number again, 641-715-3640, and the code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. Folks who dialed in, and if you can watch the background noise as well, that is always appreciated. Please use your mute button if you know you're in a noisy environment and people are talking or whatever the case is. That also is a big help. Thank you kindly. First set of folks who dialed in, line should be open. Feel free if you have commentary you would like to share.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Gus. Good evening to all the callers. Had a few observations to make. And first I wanted to say, I personally like Sheriff Clark. I love his commentary. I find it amusing. And I understand what they're using him. It's racial showcasing, man. You should be expecting this from the system. Oh, there you go. Even more. One person made a comment, said, he's the type of person that will wear his uniform on his day off. I can see it, he's dedicated to the system. And he has, I guarantee you, he'll have a moment where he'll wish that he wasn't in the near future, because it never failed. I just want to say, man, I don't think that I would go into our firehouse and ask for ice. I just would expect most of the firefighters would be white, and I wouldn't expect a good outcome to come from that. Also, I wouldn't go to school trying to fight someone because they call one of my kids a nigger, nor would I condone them going to beat up the white person, calling them a nigger. I just think both of those situations they handled in a way that was very uncodified. Mr. Nate Parker, I had no idea that the white female who accused him of raping her committed suicide. Absolutely. And I said it before when I first looked this guy up and saw this rape case that, it will come back to haunt him. The OJ effect, I think it will be coming to Nate Parker. I'm sorry if that was a metaphor, Gus. Gymnastics, as I said, in all sports, pedophilia is a huge part of white culture. These kids get shifted off to these white families who are white person trying to teach them these events, and who knows what's going on. And children, if most rape cases to grown women don't get reported by the person who was raped, the victim, I could imagine most children, it's probably even a lower percentage. So be very careful when you send your kids off to these white families, even the camps and things like that as well. I don't think that it's proper to use athletic accomplishments to determine racial progress. I think that's something white people want to do. They promote Michael Jordan and LeBron and Tiger and all the rest of the black athletes very well. And that's a part of the system. They're going to showcase certain blacks doing well, doing things that are good, that's standing up and pledge allegiance to the flag and all of that. And it's not making any progress for the rest of us. It's just entertainment. As for Lochte, I've been cracking up all week with this story. I don't know, Gus. I think I'm a little older than you. I just turned 39 last week. But when I was in high school, I believe I was in high school, probably 14, 15, there was a little white boy. He was about 16, and he was in Singapore. And Singapore, it's in Asia. It's a beautiful country. Their big cities look like the United States big cities. except for they're immaculately clean. Their subway looks like you could eat off the platform. I mean, it's just really clean from the pictures I've seen. And this white boy goes over there and spray paints something on a wall, and they catch him. And he had to be caned. Do you remember that, Gus? They caned him. I think Clinton was the president. They wanted him to have this kid extradited. He tried, but nope, he got caned. And they used this big wooden stick to hit you. They pull your pants down, and I think had to get 10 lashes. Do you remember that, Gus?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah. So, as for Lochte, hey, man, you're in another country. I think they need to extradite him. Whatever the rules are for lying to the police there, they should be enforced. That's my opinion. And lastly, you talked about the anniversary of the riots in London. This weekend was also the anniversary of the riots in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, between blacks and whites who call themselves Jews. And I just thought that was important to note as well. It's been a lot of stories talking to the families and victims and things all weekend on New York One, the local news channel here in New York City. I mute my line. Thank you, Gus.
Have you heard?
Go ahead, sir.
Greetings to Gus, callers, and the listeners. This is Rob chiming in from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And got an observation about the interview that played on the last clip. First, I'll start with a question for the person being interviewed. He said that he used to live on 49th and Locust. That's a predominantly black area. So my question would be, where does he live now? He also referred to young black people in this city as thugs, drug dealers, and he made a statement that said renters don't care about where they live. And the person that was interviewing him, what stood out to me is he said that people who, quote unquote, care about the community have to be allies with the police. And the whole interview was disgusting. Let me just say that. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I've been feeling the pressure from this city for a while. And, it's, wow. I'll just say this. The police are not here where I live. I can't speak for nowhere else. I'm just speaking where I am. They are not here to protect and serve. And I'll mute my line. Thanks for taking the call.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good evening. Yeah, I agree with the previous call about that interview with the gentleman who was talking about crime and me sound like a white reporter saying how for things to work, you need to be allies with the police. Maybe so, but I wonder. I'm pretty sure he is one of these pro-police people that only want to get upset when a black person is accused of killing or attacking a cop. I'm pretty sure he doesn't make any of these speeches for white cop killers or white people that attack police. I'm just guessing, but I'm pretty sure on it because he just sounds like that type of person. And as for the Olympics, it's always good to hear John Carlos and to hear how he feels other athletes should be proactive, which is good. I mean, it's not mandated, but it's acceptable. And it is interesting how racism, one of the things racism does is turn you away from what you really want. He talked about wanting to be a swimmer, but because of attitudes, he had to go into a chosen profession. Kind of like how Malcolm X was scarred out of being a lawyer. When his teacher told him, that a lawyer is not a good choice for him. He should be a janitor, something menial. And as for Ryan Lochte and the other white boys involved in criminal activity, because that is the term that should be used. That is the term that should be used, and it wasn't used a lot. People essentially being giddy. Oh, this is just something light what they did. No. Public urination is a crime. Getting into fights with security guards, that's a crime. Making false police reports is a crime. But as we all know, this is what people tend to do. A lot of them make these false police reports when they're the ones who've engaged in criminal activity, and it's like you're not supposed to focus on that. And then to hear what should the punishment be, it's easy. Prison. How there's absolutely no reason why this isn't being discussed. I mean, there's enough evidence of criminal activity. You prosecute them. But somehow we just want to look at this as a silly fraternity behavior when it is anything but. I guarantee you, if Usain Bolt lied about committing a crime and filing a false police report, action would have been taken. Medals taken. Everything. But as for Lochte, they're just trying to look for an excuse for him to go unpunished. And as for Nate Parker, I feel sorry for him, not just as a victim, but, just the idea that time and time again we see someone having to go to a black male having to go to trial for having sex with a white female who he was supposedly involved with. And even though he was acquitted, that's not enough. I mean, if anyone else is acquitted of a crime, we move on. I mean, I can't remember the last time the Duke lacrosse player was asked to be interviewed. I forget his name, but yeah, he has to speak about a case he was acquitted of. But meanwhile, right now, not 17 years ago, I'm talking about right now, we have white guys like Brock Turner, John Enoch, Kevin Fifield, who have actually been convicted of rape and have admitted to rape. And people don't want to destroy their abilities to earn a living. People don't want to demonize them. I mean, even when they are found guilty, we're told we should just move on. But not Mr. Parker. Hopefully, he will not be further demonized. And that's all I have to say.
Other folks that we have not heard from have commentary that they wanted to share?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings to you, Gus, and all the other callers. This is Ross. There were a couple of clips I wanted to speak on. The first, I think it's the first clip you played, or one of the earlier ones, where they were discussing climate change and birth reduction, which I would just say birth reduction for black people and specifically in non-white people in general. I just find that to be just a bunch of nonsense, simply because there is no, there's so much. Matter of fact, they just had a couple, maybe in the last month or so, they had an article that I read talking about like the millions of tons of food, like actually what they say is edible food that ends up being destroyed every day in this country, but by a year it was like astronomical. And his whole premise doesn't make sense to me. I remember one time we were having a discussion on Tando Radio Show, and they were talking about how the entire world population of 7 billion people could fit on the island of Madagascar. So when they talk about, like, there's a shortage of space and all this other stuff and food and all this stuff, it's all semantical nonsense related to reducing the population of non-white people. And then I did some research, and I found that they actually said, scientists said in 2011, that the entire world population at that time could fit in Los Angeles. So as far as just the space they would all take up if they put them all in one place. So, when you really think about the crap that these white people spew when they talk about population reduction, it's all about eugenics. And it's just like a resurrection of Margaret Sanger and her policies and her thoughts and ideas all over again. I found the Nate Parker clip as in regards to what they're bringing out now and the timing of everything. It's just standard operating procedure. He's putting out a movie that's discussing probably the biggest nightmare in the white American psyche, which would be black people on any level holistically going on some sort of revolutionary action against racism, white supremacy. And obviously they don't want that particular sort of information to be basically perpetuated to or given to the public for them to understand and dissect, specifically black people to understand and dissect. And to me, it seems like a preemptive strike to destroy the film itself or anybody, or try to discourage people from seeing it or potentially stop it from coming out. It kind of reminds me of the Spook Who Sat by the Door. I remember I had a friend that lives in Detroit, or is from Detroit, and he had told me when he was coming up, when he was a young man, actually when The Spook Who Sat by the Door came out, he said that the movie was in the theaters for less than a week before it was taken. To like literally relocate because of the premise of the film and the fact that they didn't want black people having access to that sort of revolutionary idea placed in the film. And to me, this kind of reminds me of that, essentially simply in the sense that they're just being preemptive rather than with, in the case of Sam Greenlee, and rest in peace to him. He's a great ancestor. My son interviewed him at 13 and actually it changed his life. He loves that movie. But ultimately, I just feel it's a preemptive strike to stop black people from seeing anything that shows us in the light of countering racism, white supremacy with counter violence. And the clip with Ryan Lochte, it's just interesting. I just think it's funny. Scotty was and I were having a conversation. He has a new this Black Talk Radio community that I'm a part of. So we post articles and have discussions. We were having a discussion about Ryan Lochte, and he had actually said that this is a great example of what white supremacy looks like, and that what Lochte did is the reason why white Americans are hated globally, and specifically white Americans. And I said, well, actually, I believe that white people globally are disliked by non-white people, and he's just the American example of what white people do. And I said, if you look at history around the planet, there's many people who have done the same thing that are white, just like Ryan Lochte. So the dislike for Americans specifically is because of the fact that this is a white American male that did so. But ultimately, this is just standard operating procedure that agitates the spirits of non-white people globally. And he definitely agreed with that. And it made me think of something. I was watching my local news recently, and they had a commercial for, I think it was like a Serta bed, Serta sleeping system, they call it. It's really a bed. And in the commercial, they had this white couple, and they had maybe about 10 or 15 sheep in their bedroom, and they're having this conversation with the sheep. And at the end of the commercial, they basically the white female tells the sheep, we don't need you anymore because we have this bed, so we no longer have to count sheep to get to sleep. So one of the sheep stepped forward, and they asked the woman, they said, you don't need us anymore? So she said, yes. She said, we've been faking it the whole time. And then he said, you've been faking it? And then she said, yes, for the last 3 months, meaning that's when they acquired this bed. So as of 3 months ago, they were faking counting sheep just so that the sheep were not offended. And when she said, yeah, for the last 3 months, he fainted and passed out. And I said, wow, this is a great example if anyone is looking at this in a codified manner about rhetorical ethics, that white people fake it all the time. So they can give you this impression that everything is one way and it's not what it is. And Ryan Lochte, in the situation with Ryan Lochte, is a perfect example of that. He was drunk. He wrecked the bathroom. He wanted to escape the crime he committed unscathed, essentially. So he makes up this story that he was stopped by these. I guess he said people who were impersonating police who robbed him at gunpoint. Of course, Brazil having the reputation that it has for violence, it's going to make the story seem believable. And it was only because they had cameras where he was that they were able to expose his lies. And again, this is white people. If you don't have a camera to expose their lies, or you don't have multiple witnesses, and even if you have multiple witnesses, it doesn't matter. They're still going to basically get away with the crime because they're white. But ultimately, the whole idea is that you can't take anything that they say seriously. They are the most deceptive, dishonest, and criminal people that have ever walked on two legs. And I don't really think they're people, so I call them subhumans that have ever walked on this planet. And I think that this is a great example of how white people function on a global level on a daily basis. And thank you for taking my call, Gus.
May I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Peace to everybody. Peace to Gus, the host. Peace to the family worldwide and in this country. This is V from Central New York, right outside of Syracuse. And it's been a while. It's been way too long. But, wow, things have happened. So, let's get started very quickly. Gus, when I first heard you a couple of years ago talking about, not calling people names, I was in a very different place mentally, and I didn't understand it per se, but I was studying Dr. King, and I noticed similarities between what you were saying and what Dr. King would say about it. And I said, it makes sense. We really shouldn't be calling each other names anyway. But I remember also that Layla Africa said that we are very emotional people. And from situations and circumstances that I found myself in over the last couple of years, I can say that emotions definitely get the best of us. And because we are a highly charged people, emotionality tends to result in explosive behavior towards an object or a person who we perceive as unlikely to threaten our safety and stability. So, therefore, we lash out at black people. What I would suggest is, as I think Gus, you demonstrate wonderfully, is learning, but not just about white supremacy. Learn about ourselves. And there's a great book that I've been reading called Black Children, Their Roots, Culture, and Learning Styles. And there is a great bibliography in it. I've actually purchased several of the books recommended, and this book teaches. Oh, well, it has taught me, so I can't say that I'll teach you the same thing, but it has taught me about why I think some of the things I think and do some of the things I do without really thinking about it. And it's a book that I think if most black people, particularly young black people, read, it would make their lives a lot easier. Secondly, the question of the viability and sensibility of blocking traffic in order to make a social statement has been raised many times by particularly white conservative people, but increasingly more and more by those people identifying themselves as white liberals. I have had to remind several individuals, some black, some white, of what Dr. King said in 1967 in his Macy Lecture number 1, which I highly recommend. Actually, I highly recommend the entire series, but in the first, he stated that nonviolence had moved to a position and a point where its usefulness had grown stagnant, and that the black man had to make a broader statement to essentially grind the society to a halt, and that it was necessary for black people to do this in order to say to white people, we are not going to let you continue doing what you're doing to us and think then that you can continue doing business. Not going to work. He said this late 1967. You can find it on the internet. Thirdly, and lastly, the idea of a riot is something that, well, of course, we hear a lot about, but very few people know that the definition of what a riot is has changed. In 1828, Webster defined a riot, firstly, as to revel, to run to excess in feasting, drinking, or other sensuous indulgenceness. 2, to luxuriate, to be lightly excited. And 3, to banquet, to live in luxury, to enjoy. And finally, 4, to raise an uproar or sedition. By basically 100 years later, I looked in a new dictionary which I just found from Funks and Wagnalls from I think it was 1921-ish, but number 1, 2, and 3 were compressed into one definition. Number 4 had become the first definition. And since then, that has been the definition of riot. Now, mind you, I don't believe they called them riots in 1921 during the Red Summer when dozens of black communities were attacked, but that was what a riot became. And so we always have to keep that in mind. When they're talking about riots, the individuals who are actually rioting aren't black people. According to their own guide, their luxury means that they are rioting. Thank you, and I'll mute my line. Oh, Gus, can I make a quick announcement?
What's it pertaining to?
I'm actually having a speaking engagement.
Oh, let's hear it.
Okay. In Auburn, New York, I think it's 23 Chapman Avenue, Booker T. Washington Community Center. I'm holding a worship service for African ancestry next week on Saturday, 1 through 3 o'clock. Everybody who is in the area is definitely welcome. Thank you very much. And by the way, that's in Auburn, New York. Booker T. Washington Community Center. All you got to do is just Google it. It'll come up. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Other folks that we have not heard from, if y'all had commentary, feel free.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings, everyone. My first report is as a high school football coach. Our first game was an exhibition game. Took place about 24 hours ago. Well, actually, yeah, a little bit more than 24 hours ago. And going normal as high school football games go, if anybody can remember going to them when they were in high school. And then, in my opinion, as a result of racism, white supremacy, the reactionary behavior of non-white black people, even non-white black people who are considered to be young people, which is a lot of cases with each other is not positive, erupted into gunfire. Actually, it's not unusual at a high school football game. In my own experiences as a football coach, it has happened at least twice before, and it's happened a lot more times in between, and so it's not unusual. And I just kind of like chalked it up to the results that from racist white supremacy and the effects that it does on our minds and esteem, self-respect. We do a lot of incorrect things, sometimes with the direct intent of killing another black person. This is why I'm in so much agreement on what I heard the host stating earlier about name calling, because preceding a lot of dead black people at the hands of other black people, it is name calling. Fire station, yes, they're supposed to treat a person coming into the fire station. That particular call, from my experiences, would have resulted into a not necessarily an emergency call, but a medical call, as it should have been. But that is very possible that happens everywhere where there are white people, especially into not treating a black person with the respect that they deserve. So I'm not surprised. Matter of fact, with myself, I think years ago, I was retired even at the time, that I went to a fire station close to where I grew up at my mother's house for my mother. She was in the car to get her a ice pack, and you'd have thought I was going there to steal a fire truck. A lot of times I don't announce that I'm a retired firefighter. That doesn't make any difference about anything with white people, really. Only from a phony standpoint, it may sometimes, but I don't do that. But I can sense there was some sort of anguish into relieving a ice pack, something that probably would cost about $2 at the local drugstore. Anyway, that's to be expected. Number 3, Mr. Parker's rape case. As someone mentioned before, the timing, I've heard that contested into saying, well, they allowed him to receive, I think, something like $17 million in a contract for it to go, it's quote-unquote independent film to go popular. But nevertheless, it still probably was a situation to be timed with the advent of it going mass-produced as it probably is going to be, and to, at the same time, kind of like divert the attention from the direct counterviolence that Mr. Turner enacted upon white people at a time when it is not the first time, I would never say that, but illustrated through cameras and whatnot, black people getting killed by white people who happen to be, for the most part, most of them being law enforcement officers. And it may get a nigga some ideas, you know, as far as they're concerned, you know. So the whole idea is to divert it and focus on the creator of the film, even although he was acquitted of this, and in turn the white person committed suicide. Unfortunately, there are some black people that I heard with my own ears that basically stated that they look at Mr. Parker in a negative way with the advent of this white woman not getting what she set out to get, which is a case on Mr. Parker. Anyway, the swimmers lying. Well, that's definitely not unusual out of white people. And the racist code word was crime. The idea that's easily something a white person is going to do is to focus on, well, I was robbed. Certainly in an area that is the second largest area in the world that where non-white people who are called Africans are allowed to stay, and they can't go into the community in the area itself to find something constructive at all. So they would basically give a whole lot of publicity to a white male, a lying white male, which is, you know, not unusual a terminology to state that they were victims of crime, and in turn they were doing the usual thing that white males do. And you can hear all of the gamut of excuses. Young people are going to do this, and all other kinds of excuses. But nevertheless, this is something that white people do no matter what age, in my opinion, because they perceive or know that they can get away with it without very little or no retribution to it. I will be I'm not surprised by a lot of things, but I'll be very, very surprised if they even think about extraditing them back to Brazil for any reason at all. Matter of fact, even if they murdered somebody in Brazil, I would find it very, very difficult that they would send them back to Brazil. At the worst for them, of something even more heinous, that they would do something to whereas they would suffer the consequences right here. But they definitely would send them back to some place. Although there are white people in Brazil that are in charge, but I just don't think they'll do that because somehow it would kind of like be against the pattern of racism and white supremacy. Thank you.
For sure. Other folks that we... Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Okay. Good evening to Gus, the host, and to all the other callers and listeners on the line. Just want to say a couple of things. The very first story, Roz brought it up about the global warming and, there's too many black people on the planet. I mean, that's how I kind of took it, because keep in mind, Europeans' birth rate, and this is Europeans in Europe and Europeans in the world, and I know in this country, their birth rate their death rate is higher than their birth rate, so they're dying. So if, you're going to talk about too many people on the planet, that's to, reduce our numbers and stunt our growth. So I just think that's just kind of foolishness, and I do agree with Ron. I think this world has enough to, I just don't know if the world could ever have too many people. I just think the divine creator created it so that if there's a problem with food and all this stuff like that, that's man. That's the problems that men will cause. And I know too, there's a push to reduce this population control. And I guess where you end up with very few black people and a lot of white people from things about to hear. The other thing I want to say is thank you for addressing the issue about the name calling. And it appears to me, as y'all probably know, I'm on my Facebook and I read a lot of stuff, and it just appears to me that as the heat is turned up on black people, and I mean, it's rough out here. It just seems like we're turning in on each other, and this name calling is just, it is just off the chain. Every time you turn around, it is painful that we don't agree, yet here I got to call you, I got to call you a nigger, I got to call you a coon, I got to call you out of your name, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And I do understand what the young man said before about, being emotional people, volatile times, and, in the sense, because that is striking out, but somewhere we have got to get a hold of that, because people, you don't listen to people when people are calling you idiots and all kinds of names. So I just really do want to thank you for addressing that, because this stuff is coming out. I mean, to say it just like it's like it's nothing. You don't even think about it. And I do believe I remember listening to one of your programs in the archives of a guy in Washington, D.C., and I remember he was saying how something like he would say he was in the gang. I think there were some issues, and then he basically began to change, and the one thing he began to change is his language, because he was saying, he was giving an example. He said, if you always saying screw that nigger, you know what he was saying, and blank that nigger, this thing. He said it's easy then to do what? Pick up a gun and go on the other side of town, and you're gonna kill that nigger. I mean, it just becomes so easy to move from name calling to death, So I just really want to thank you for addressing that, because it is off the chain. As far as the what's the Lochte, whatever his name, the golden boy, the one who went to Rio, with the saying that he was going to be the star of this thing, and he's a swimmer, and so Phelps was getting all the attention. So let's be for real what we're looking at here. This white guy, he dyed his hair this silver gray color, going down to, be a part of the swimming team. I'm assuming he's a part of the team. And, he wasn't getting the attention that, he felt that he should have been getting. And so when he, to tell the story, I've been robbed, I kind of look at that in many ways, that, the lie that he told, we were robbed. But then the other thing is, too, is that, even in the Olympics, I've been robbed of the attention that I should be getting. I've been robbed, like I said, of the attention that I should be getting. But it's really just pitiful. And to me, the ultimate of white supremacy or anti-blackness is to call a 32-year-old white male a kid. Well, they're just kids, and all of them in their 20s. So all of them, I think, are probably over 25. Oh, they're just kids having fun. And that is just like the ultimate. And I think that's about it. Thank you for taking my call. I'll mute my line.
For sure. Other folks that we have not heard from, if you all had commentary, you should be with us. Feel free to chime in.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, this is Ken Steele from Chicago. And I just wanted to say thanks to Gus for introducing this segment with the instruction of not to name call, because I just noticed people reporting on Facebook that the word coon is now back on TV. Apparently, it was during an episode of Law and Order SVU, and a white character directed this comment towards the character Finn, which is played by Ice-T. And I'm not saying that black people invented the term, but I have seen a significant uptick in the use of the term by black people online, and that's where I saw it being used a lot more. And then you're now seeing it on TV, so it's coming back to get us. And speaking of name calling and sources of name calling, another thing that I've noticed is that more and more black empowerment, I guess you could say, or counter-racist personalities from the online space are now being invited to participate in discussions on cable news and some network news discussions. I'm starting to notice this more and more. I don't know what to make of it. I suspect that racist games are going to be played with this sort of exposure. So to those who are in this space and who are being courted by those outlets, I just, I'd say be very careful with what you're getting involved with by getting involved with those people on TV. I also want to note that it seems to be a week where a theme I'm noticing is black people are being blamed for the false misgivings and the bad behavior of white people. With the Ryan Lochte story, it was kind of implied initially that the people who allegedly robbed Ryan Lochte were non-white people. And I'm seeing reports from a news source that reports on crime, Don Diva magazine. They're saying that there were some black people that were detained as a result of these claims. So there were very real-life consequences for this erroneous report by Ryan Lochte. And then Hillary Clinton was in the news earlier this week for claiming that she was instructed by Colin Powell to have a private email server and mishandle classified information from that server. So she was basically blaming a black person for this crime. And then a Florida man was, I guess he was found by police after he ate two of his neighbors and I think stabbed a third. And so he killed two of his neighbors, stabbed a third, and they said that he was on a substance that they called flocka. And the fact that it appears that they have renamed Chinese synthetic bath salts to this name flocka, and it again kind of falls in this line of blaming black people for the misbehavior, misgivings, and just all of the nonsense that these people are up to. So that's something that's another thing that I've heard. And then finally, a news report that I didn't hear being discussed in any of the clips early on is that the UN earlier this week went ahead and admitted spreading cholera in Haiti back in 2010. Apparently, the locals, since that cholera outbreak, had suspected that activity at one of the UN bases was responsible for the spread of cholera in that region at that time. And now, 6 years later, the UN has come out and openly admitted this. And anybody who is familiar with Neely Fuller, this is just standard textbook white supremacy with respect to how they go into areas. And sure enough, after deliberately poisoning and spreading disease in this area, they're announcing this and announcing a return to Haiti. So it's kind of the double whammy of sorts. So that's just something worth mentioning. And then finally, I don't know if this was mentioned earlier, but the Department of Justice recently announced changes with the Bureau of Prisons that they are eliminating federal contracts with private prison contracting services. So the stocks for CCA and GEO went down reportedly over 40% in market cap value. So following this announcement, somebody pointed out to me that this could be a ploy to kind of set Hillary Clinton up for any criticism that she might face regarding her involvement in the passage of the crime bill back in the 1990s. So they may just go ahead and keep all those prisons open and just operate them under the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So I don't know if that's such a constructive development as they're typifying it in the media, but that happened. So I guess that's all I have to report for now, and I will mute my line. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Other folks that we have not heard from, any callers that we have not heard from have commentary they wanted to share?
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. This is a female caller from New York. I tuned in late, but I did get the report from the privileged Asian speaking on the Black Lives Matter. Was that what that was, Gus? Was that a Black Lives Matter event that she was speaking about?
Correct. In Minnesota, where they were protesting, they blocked one of the major highways there in Minnesota, and Jamar Clark, obviously, where they were not going to press charges for the officer that shot and killed him, and then Philando Castile was shot and killed just a few weeks ago. They were protesting that, blocked the highway, and they were talking about how they explicitly talked about racism, white supremacy, and how they were using that in their protest to put white people up front so that they would be the first people to come in contact with enforcement officials who were on the scene, and then this as quote-unquote Asian female and her not being treated by a black person, and so how that dynamic of anti-blackness plays out in the system of white supremacy.
Okay, two things stood out to me. First of all, that whole story made me nauseous because the thought of white people making some sort of cocoon around black people to protect them is nothing but a spectacle, and it's for sheer show. And I'm kind of, I'm exercising a little bit of VGQ. Yeah, I'm not into that Black Lives Matter thing. I think it's it's a theater. So, white people get to talk, say to exonerate themselves. But I wonder how many of them, when November rolls around, how they're gonna vote, because that's just how they get down. My second, other reason why it particularly made me nauseous is because Asians, Hispanics, East Indians, any of the quote-unquote brown people on the planet will never had it as bad as black people. So I don't care if she's calling herself being a privileged Asian, a privileged Indian, a privileged Puerto Rican, a privileged whatever, Himalayan. You're not black. And you can't identify, and they will never be able to identify. And the thought, like I said, of white people making some kind of cocoon around black people, that is, in my opinion, a huge act of racism, because all they're doing, once again, is doing that whole white Jesus thing. We want to save the black people, the white saviors. They have no legitimate recourse, space in that quote-unquote Black Lives Movement. And if it was about Black Lives Really Mattering movement, I would see something similar to that of what the Panthers did. But I don't. So, yeah, that's all I have to say about that, and I'll mute my line.
When you say similar to what the Panthers did, what do you mean specifically?
Feeding people, clothing people, along actively. Not running around protesting, waiting for somebody getting shot and running up and down the street. I'm talking about real community upliftment. I don't hear about any of Black Lives Matter meetings, events going into areas where the gentrification and all these other things are happening, and they're setting up programs. I'm talking about black people doing this, not white people, black people. And that's all I have to say. I really believe that it's nothing but theater. I'm not sold or convinced on it, and that's what my melanin is telling me, but I could be incorrect. I'll mute my line.
Thank you for the clarification. Other folks, anybody that we missed, please do not wait till the last minute. If you have commentary you would like to share, get your hand up now, especially if we have not heard from you. Do not wait until there are 5 minutes left in the broadcast. Anyone we have not heard from at all, you should speak now.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you, sir. Greetings to Gus, the host, the listeners, and callers. There was a few things that I heard in the audio segments. There were, excerpts. It was that one where I think it was something that happened at a high school, I think Choctaw. I think that was the place it happened at. And I think that metaphor was used about spades. Like, Gus, do you know if that was in Mr. Fuller's word guide about that reference to spades or some ace of spades? I don't know what it was. I heard.
Call a spade a spade. I'm pretty sure it is. I don't have my word guide in front of me right now, but I'd be also willing to wager a substantial amount on that as well, that spade is in Mr. Fuller's word guide, and he, I think, suggests not using that term.
Yeah, because I thought about that as soon as I heard that part of the segment, and especially, when it's an incident of a victim responding to racism, white supremacy, and that term being used, that is very interesting. And I also thought about how you was talking about when we are called these derogatory terms, nigger and other words, and, when we give a response, we're at a disadvantage, and we are pretty much made the villains or, the people who didn't initiate the problem or the incident. So, and then what I noticed also about that segment was they didn't disclose the amount of time the other student, I'm assuming this was a white student, like how long he was suspended. I guess, they never really ever got to showing that or explaining how long he was going to be suspended. And there was another segment where I think they were talking about the Olympics, and the guy, he asked a codified question, I think, when he used the word politics or politicism. And he said, well, when we have these flags out here, isn't that politicizing an event? And like, I think that was racist. That might have been a white person who was conducting that interview. Like, they didn't answer that question. Like, like I guess the recording of that interview went off, and they just went to ending the segment. Like, okay, that was our interview with such and such. I don't know who the person was. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And that's pretty much all I have right now. Thank you.
Dr. John Carlos, that was who was speaking. He was did the what's recognized as the Black Power Salute, Fist in the Air, at the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. Anybody that we missed, anybody that we have not heard from at all, have commentary they wanted to get in?
Hello, good night. Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I found it interesting about the, I think that was Mark Duggan in London about the riots, and I didn't really hear anything about what happened to the police. I didn't know why the story was focused on what sounded to me like a white person complaining about not sending their kids to piano lessons. I found that very interesting. And Ryan Lochte. Ryan Lochte, I mean, that's like standard operating procedure for white people, lying and then blaming black people about it, blaming black people about the crime. And what else? The Olympics. I thought it was very codified. Just mentioned the guy's name. I guy's name already. What was his name, Gus? The guy that
Dr. John Carlos. Dr. John Carlos?
Yeah, Dr. John Carlos, right. I thought it was very codified when I guess the interviewer was asking him about I guess the athletes not being political during the games, and he was like, everybody's not him. We do what they do basically. And what gets me about the Olympics is like black people are suffering worldwide. Black people are being shot in America. In Jamaica, the resources are not ours. Unemployment is high. The crime is high. Like suffering. So why is it such a big deal for somebody to go somewhere, run around a track, and get a medal? What does it do for black people overall? I'm not seeing the connection, and why is it important for me to be cheering and to feel happy because somebody runs around a track or do some flips or something? I'm not seeing the connection of why that's important at this time in this context. What else I gotta say? I find it interesting too with the first step about the school, with the sounds like the black females siblings went to beat that white kid up, and the cop said, he made a statement saying that he's there to protect people who want to come to school to learn, to meet, implying that the brothers who did that did not want to learn at school. What else? You say something quick sometimes. I have to like choose what I want to comment on, but I think I'm gonna stop it there for now. Thank you.
Right on. Lots of things happening on the plantation. It was an interesting week. Anybody that we missed completely? Anybody who has not been able to share at all thus far? Right. I will assume we got everybody. Again, do not wait till the last minute if you have comments that you want to make sure you get in. A person wrote in, do you think they would have brought up all of the allegations against Nate Parker about him allegedly raping this white female from 20 years ago if the female involved would have been a non-white female, particularly if she had been a black female. Question that was asked from a listener. I know with that situation, and I saw a lot of different people talking about it, writing about it this week. I'll make sure I preface my comments by saying I was not going to see this film anyway. Before all of this had come out, I had said I'm totally done with slave flicks. I don't care what they make. It can have my parents in it, grandparents, great-grandparents. I don't care what the story is about. I am totally done. Any films of black bondage, I'm not watching. I'm not doing any analysis, any thoughts. I'm totally done with that whole genre of entertainment, if that's what it's going to be. That being said, I remember commenting when this all came out at the Sundance Film Festival earlier this year. At the time, I thought it was noteworthy that Fox Searchlight brought this film. I think it came up when Roz and I were discussing it. Fox Searchlight Pictures paid that $17 million figure to Nate Parker for this film, and that is a part of the Rupert Murdoch empire. At least in my view, I think it is probably not a coincidence that right in the midst of Roger Ailes having to depart from Fox News and this big to-do in the Rupert Murdoch empire about sexual assault that he committed, Roger Ailes, this suspected racist white man, against these white females at Fox News, that this comes out with Nate Parker. I am sure, I think even one of the reports that I saw, the representatives at Fox Searchlight Pictures, they said that they knew about this when they paid for the film. This was not news to them, all this coming out over the past few days or what have you. They knew about this in advance when they purchased the film, and they were moving ahead with their production. I think when I wrote online this week, I said, to me, this seems similar to the way that when the Ray Rice footage, when he horribly assaulted his now wife, this was back also in the summer of 2014 when many things happened, that they waited. They had that footage and they sat on it for about 6 months before they released it, and they waited until it was in the middle of everything going down in Ferguson after the shooting death of Michael Brown Jr. Then they released the footage. And I think racists, that is one of their strategies, where they will have information but they don't release it. When it happens, they will wait until it can benefit them in some way, shape, form as to when they release that information and can provoke a response from people. I thought that one of the most important statements came from I even have a problem saying alleged because this case was adjudicated. That typically does not happen. I mean, they say you are innocent until proven guilty. This was adjudicated and he was proven innocent. That should be it. It shouldn't even be alleged rapist, none of that. Done. There was no appeal, no nothing. Not guilty, and particularly given the context of white supremacy, they didn't say he had a super team. I didn't hear that Johnny Cochran was on his legal defense to get him off. I didn't hear about any of that, and even pause, because this happened at Penn State. They have a history of raping and protecting rapists, child rapists that are not black people. And I remember, if you even want to talk about rioting, I remember and saw the footage of a whole lot of whites rioting because one of the enablers of child rapists, convicted child rapists, and former Penn State University staff, Jerry Sandusky, when the former head coach Joe Paterno was fired, when he knew about all this and didn't do the right thing, and even admitted that before he died, they rioted and were so mad. But all that to the side, when they wrote about this in the New York Times, one of the most important lines was, this white woman's parents, they said, I'll just read what they said in the Times. The woman's family sounded less convinced in a statement to the New York Times on Tuesday, which read in part, "We are dubious of the underlying motivations that bring this present to light after 17 years. I feel the exact same way. It's not that they care about this white woman who is probably a racist and committed suicide in 2012. I'm not all shook up about that either. In my view, just all of it. I've seen a lot of reports this week attacking Nate Parker and putting him in the same category as Bill Cosby, which that's just a total disgrace. Not that I'm a big fan of Nate Parker. Like I said, I'm not going to see this film anyway. Just if I've been through a court of law, I've had due process, not guilty, to have to go through all this. I mean, really, you got to tell me something other than that. I'm not encouraging anyone to go to see the film, which I'm not going to see, but this just all looks very coordinated, massive act of racism, white supremacy for many, many reasons. But the question was posed if we think this would be happening if the female in this case, if it was a black female or a non-white female in general. That was one of the questions that was posed. There was, I think, one other thing I was going to get in. Doesn't come to mind now. Just I'm sure I'll get it in before we get to the end of the the protesting. That was something that I was going to ask because I think at least one person, when they were talking about the protesting and kind of not allowing racists to just do business as usual. That in terms of talking about what's happening with blocking the streets and the protests and what was happening, there have been lots of protests, right, just over the last 2 years, certainly throughout the history of racism, white supremacy. Have you all seen any evidence that these protests, that they actually produce a constructive result? I mean, even if we just want to look at a recent period, like last 5 years, because we heard about what happened in London and Ferguson and New York with Eric Garner and now Wisconsin. Has anybody seen any evidence that, this protesting, blocking the streets, the die-ins, any of that produces anything constructive? And if so, what constructive result have you seen? And I even if you want to include, because I think Dr. Umar Abdullah Johnson, he said that it makes the problem of white supremacy, racism, it makes it more apparent so that other black people who might not be thinking that this is a big problem that I should be devoting my time and energy to, I see these protests. So now I am more interested in studying about racism, white supremacy, and focusing time and energy on that problem. So if you think that that's been a result, definitely include that as well. But has anybody seen any constructive result as a result of any of these protests? Questions? Anybody, if folks would like to respond?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I would say because when I was very young, my father used to take me. He took me during the 80s to the United Nations and all a whole host of different places when different African countries were fighting for their independence, and I was there for those things with him, myself, my sister. And obviously, those countries gained some semblance of independence from direct white control, but they're still white controlled. I think, and I've always said this, I've said this quite often, I think that all of those protests are the equivalent of, I would say, holistic tantrums. That's what they look like to me. Whether we're burning something down or if we're just out there yelling slogans with placards and signs and things like that. I just think that, to me, it's a shining example of our impotence as far as the fact that we're just going to go out there, say a few words, maybe yell in some white people or some cop's face for a couple of hours, potentially get arrested and abused. And then, after that, you go back either to your daily life or after the anger wears off, you go back to your regular life until the next incident comes up. That's why I just feel like the whole concept of codification and that united independent way of approaching the issue is a lot better. I think it's also dangerous. These events, but there's all of these black people in one place like that, surrounded by law enforcement in basically military gear. I think it's dangerous for people to bring their children there. I think it's dangerous for them to be there. I think it puts you under the federal radar because then they have your picture, they have whatever, whatever you have done at that event, and they'll start to formulate some sort of psychological profile on you. And I just think it's not effective. I really don't think it's anything like the black female said that she sees it as racial theater. I think it's theater. I really, and it's no disrespect. Whatever the BGQ, if that's what they choose to do, that's fine. But I think that in reality, it's just something to. And I don't think it really, Dr. Umar. As far as what you said about Dr. Umar, I don't really agree with that. I think the people who are out there. Agitating at these events tend to be the same people. I don't think there's many new additions to those groups. The only time I think that there is an added number of people is if there's some sort of rebellion where they're looting and burning things down. Then you're going to get, people who are basically opportunists and saying, okay, well, everybody's, burning stuff down, so I want to get on that, that whole thing as well and start burning things and stealing the stuff too. But outside of those sorts of rebellions, I don't think you get any additions as far as people being made aware of it and saying, okay, well, this is a bigger problem than I thought. I'm going to do something about it. That does happen, but I don't think it happens that often to really make a big difference. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Never heard.
Yes, ma'am. I just want to bring Puff in real quick because we haven't heard from her at all. Puff, did you have?
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Did you have commentary, and then we'll get our caller in Ohio?
Yeah, I did. Just a few quick comments. No, to answer the question, no, I don't think that really helps because obviously it doesn't help. The protests don't help black people, not as a group, because they still look how many people they have shot. Hello?
Yes, ma'am. We can.
Look how many. Okay. Look how many people they have shot, and they protest every time, and people still getting shot. So I don't see any real difference the protesting makes. But I also want to add a quick comment, to the commentary that Gus made a few minutes ago, where he said, do you think a black woman would, get the kind of treatment that Nate Parker's victim, quote unquote, has gotten? And I don't think the lady is I don't think that a black woman would get, not in equal circumstances, get the type of treatment that this lady has gotten post-mortem. Let's also add to the fact that a year after this incident, she gave birth to a child. So, she got pregnant like a few months after it happened, and then, and then they say that she was on psychiatric medication also. And so I just don't think that a black person would receive a black woman would receive that kind of treatment had it been equal circumstances, like she got pregnant a few months later after that happened. And so, no, I don't think that would happen. And go ahead to the next person.
For sure. Caller in Ohio, I just want to make sure that I get in. Pause for the victims of Daniel Holtzclaw, who did not get anywhere near this amount of attention for someone who was totally exonerated in Nate Parker. Daniel Holtzclaw was convicted and got way over 150 years sentence, and I don't remember them having this much outrage and to do, and this is a disgrace, and this was an enforcement officer, not just some ragtag civilian. Caller in Ohio.
Thank you. Yeah, you have a very good point with that about Holtzclaw and Nate Parker. I just want to say, to me, the answer to the question is no, because first thing, they don't appear to me to have a plan. The other thing, and this is, because you have to have a plan, you're going to do, because I just think that something happens, people are out in the street, and then, you're out there protesting, and, whatever is done, and then people go home, go to bed, wake up the next day, and they go back to living. Those that work, they got to go to work, they got children to school, life, goes on. And so I think I heard it was Claude Anderson, I think, who said one time, this is one of his speeches, his videos, and he said something about you protest, he said, and they know that, are you in a march, they know that, so they're going to get out the way, let you do your thing. And he said they know because after you do your little protesting, do your marching, you go back to life as usual. But this is my biggest concern, and it's just something about what went down in Dallas that when I started trying to think about this, that just kind of, something that for me, I may be out in left field with this, but just bear with me. I think because they know these things happen, they're going to protest. Black people are going to come protest. Then I think people can use the protest of black people to do things, and then who you blame it on? You blame it on black people. Now, I mentioned this on this show, on this program before when we had the compensatory call right after what happened in Dallas. I don't believe Michael Johnson did anything that they have said he did. That's just me. I'm not saying things didn't happen. I'm not saying that people didn't die. People died. Things happen. What I'm saying, I think, because according to one report that I heard, that Black Lives Matter were protesting, and that it was supposed to be, because remember the mayor said afterwards that the police were working with Black Lives Matter, and I remember that kind of like a flag went up for me, because I'm like, I know that Black Lives Matter, that's who they are, that's who they're focused on, and basically said what the police is doing, is wrong. So they're focused on police. So I'm like, oh, so now the police are working with Black Lives Matter. And so when I initially heard of this, when it was going on in Dallas, it was overnight. I just happened to wake up one night, had my radio on, listen to the news, found out this was going on, and they had the one man. Well, it was Michael Johnson. It says one man did this. And I remember first initial reports, there were 2 other people, and one of them was a lady. And then it dwindled down to this one person. And so there was a talk show on, and the caller asked the man, he said, well, how would he know, the question was something like, how would the person, Michael Johnson, I'm assuming, know where these police would be at to be able to do what he did? And the host of the show, he did some investigation. He come back, he says, well, the police were the ones who set up the route for the Black Lives Matter to protest. And when I heard that, I'm just like, wait a minute, something just don't sound right. So I'm saying that you come out to protest, there are people who can use those black people out there calling themselves protesting to do things, and then what? You blame it on black people. I don't have any evidence to prove anything that I said, but I just believe that Michael Johnson did not do what we're being told that he did. The bomb, remember they had to kill him with a bomb, and then a picture shows up of him. It's supposed to be his dead body on Facebook. So, so I just started looking at things. Call me conspiracy theorists, call me, and I may agree with that. But I just think that these protests don't do nothing. And now I believe that the police, I just believe the police and others will use black people out there calling themselves protesters to do things and then turn around and blame it on black people. And since the police, they're the ones who control all the evidence. You have videotape that the police do, their cameras and stuff. They keep that tape. They don't ever release it. The McQuan tape in Chicago, that guy was still 2-3 years ago. They just released that tape. And then also tapes can be edited and tapes can be messed with. So, the answer to the question, I know that's loud, but the answer to the question to me is no. And thank you. I'll mute my line.
Other folks have comments they wanted to make sure they got in. If you wanted to respond to either the questions about Nate Parker or the protesting, or if you had other comments you wanted to get in before we wrap up.
Can I be heard?
We'll get Thomas in New York, then we'll get retired firefighter.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. Yeah, I wanted to say what the lady just said. She was absolutely right. The new phase of COINTELPRO isn't going to be someone spying on you in your organization. They use Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, all of those outlets now to do those things. And if I'm not mistaken, Black Lives Matter is a hashtag. Those people that they put in the forefront, we don't know if they started that hashtag or not. It's something that galvanizes people using social media. It's not a real tangible thing. What makes it real is these protests, and what makes the protest real is that someone tweeted or they Facebook that there's going to be a protest, show up. And this is the same tool that was used to cause the Arab Spring. If you remember back in 2012, meet up in the square. Everyone was doing it through their social media outlets, Facebook, YouTube, and things, and they go meet up in the square and have no idea that they're being used as a tool to be shown on our media to look like they're against Gaddafi or against Mubarak or whoever. So it's just a tool that they're using now, and I would really be very wary of anything like that. I'm not sure what their main objective is going to be with that, but it's not going to be good. What I wanted to make a comment on also real quick was the first clip you played about the population, and it's been ongoing. It's been ongoing for them to try to decrease the population. This carbon emissions thing is nothing more than them going to be charging us to breathe. They're going to give you how much carbon you use a day or how much you put into the air. And this is going to be terrible. and it's going to happen because, they're in charge. So just be very wary of these vaccinations. When you look at how they're going to decrease the population, they say through vaccinations. They're going to pretty much, people are going to do it willingly. And I think that they said specifically in that clip they were going to target India with soap operas where, birth planning are going to be very prominent, just like they do here. And I could see that they were decreasing that population very quickly. I'll meet my line.
Retired firefighter?
Yes. My answer is no as far as any constructive act because of protesting primarily. What is showing to be is actually a reaction to something that someone has done to you perceivably that was incorrect. And people like Mr. Fuller, specifically Mr. Fuller, illustrates about time and energy. And time and energy that's placed into saying and doing something constructive, or spending your time doing something of constructive value. And to protest doesn't seem to be something that's going to result into constructive value because you are basically reacting. Now, in order for people who decided to identify themselves as white to establish and maintain and expand and refine racism, white supremacy, I don't think they were reacting to whatever was going on with people before the system of racism, white supremacy. They weren't protesting against whatever non-white people were doing. They imposed an action, an incorrect one, and an unjust one that we know today as white supremacy. So logic, I'm speaking logic, unless somebody can tell me something different. I'm speaking logically speaking, to protest on racism, white supremacy is kind of like a waste of your time and energy. As far as not from a Michael Ibani standpoint, but from a standpoint of logic. You like wasting your time and energy. White people know that they're practicing racism, white supremacy against you. That's all I have to say.
Someone can have a concise comment they needed to get in before we wrap up. When I say concise, like you can do it in 30 seconds or less, since we did our 3 hours. Anybody have a final comment they can get in 30 seconds before we conclude?
Hello, Gus, can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
I know we don't do the classifying, but you don't really play any clips about like Syria. How are those people classified? Do you know?
I would suspect you probably have some individuals that would be classified, accepted as white there, as well as some non-white people. But I would have to see if you're talking about the people that they are saying are quote-unquote refugees that are, ending up in different places, and what are we going to do, and lots of hand-wringing. I think those folks, at least most of the people that I've seen, I think they would be classified as non-white. Now, maybe some of them, they can get in and be accepted as white. I'd have to see the people specifically, but most of the time, the way that I see these people being depicted, the specific people that I've seen, they do look like they have some melanin. They don't look like, at least people that I've seen, I don't think they'd be accepted as white. Did I answer your question? Is that clear?
I was just curious how come we don't really play any clips about Syria and about the conflict that goes on over in the so-called Middle East.
I think we have played a few. No, I have included a few this year, I would say within the last 2-3 months, about them specifically being in Germany. I think there was one that I played specifically about that area of the world in Germany, them coming there and it being a problem, as well as some of the other places in Europe where that was a big conflict, and even that influencing what happened with Brexit. And why they voted to leave the European Union. I'd have to, if you called me on it, I think I could put my hand on at least a few that we've played. I certainly would agree we haven't played an abundance of clips about that, but there have been a few.
Okay, thank you for your response.
We will be here tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. Global Sunday Talk on racism. Like I said, I'm eager to hear from folks in the UK about their reflections 5 years from the London riots and what's been happening with the anniversary and what have you, where the attention has been focused, as well as some of the other things that have been happening here. What they're discussing with the Olympics. The Olympics were just there in 2012, so be looking forward to doing that tomorrow. Again, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. If you have questions, complaints, guest suggestions, or if you cannot find something in the archives, you can drop us an email, untiljustice@gmail.com. Untiljustice@gmail.com. On Twitter @untiljustice. Definitely enjoyed hearing from folks this evening. Great commentary. Hopefully it was a constructive investment of your Saturday evening. Invest if you think the program is constructive. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. Listener supported counter racist radio. PayPal button is in the top right corner. If you're not in the PayPal, drop us an email. We'll get you a physical mailing address. Thank you to all the folks who have supported, invested, kept us on the air for 7+ years. Hope the program has been, continues to be worthy of your time and energy. With that, we will wrap things up. As I've stated consistently, sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. One of the worst combinations in the known universe. Whites, alcohol. If you're going to be out and about, I know it's summer is kind of concluding, so if you're kind of getting your last fun in before it all is done, you certainly do not want to lax in your codification. Racists, white supremacists do not take breaks. You cannot take a break from your codification. If you're going to be in a vehicle, you do not want to be under the influence. That is whether you're a driver, passenger, even as a pedestrian. You never know when it is going to be your day to bump into Daniel Holtzclaw, Darren Wilson. You want to be able to make phenomenal decisions, to do everything you can to keep yourself as safe as possible. Really, whether you bump into a race soldier with a badge or no. Bumping into whites under any circumstances can be a dangerous, life-ending, life-altering experience. Make sure that you can respond appropriately according to whatever your counter-racist code is. Alcohol is not going to help those situations be resolved in your favor. That said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.